Before this video begins, I'd like to quickly thank the sponsor, JK Chimney. They're a personal friend and a great person. The chimney business may be a bit of a niche, but if you're in the market, do head on over and check them out. There'll be links in the description of this video. A second thank you also needs to go to everyone who supports me over on Patreon. You probably hear creators say this all the time, but I don't think I'd be here if it weren't for you. And one more note before I begin. I'd like to let you know that this case has spanned over 3 decades, and the video available for review is incredibly extensive. As the story unfolds, you will notice different testimony coming from 2 different trials. Most of it will be from the trial in 2023, but there is some coming from a trial which occurred in 2007-2008. All of the details surrounding why there are 2 trials will be explored much later in the video, but for now I thought I'd give you a heads up, in case the clearly different camera work and time periods might have been a point of confusion for you. Now with that out of the way, let's dive in. Julie Carol Griffin was born February 26, 1958, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and she was the second youngest with 4 brothers. Her family was known to be incredibly creative and hardworking, and her brothers described their early life with fond words wrapped around pleasant memories. As described by her brother, Paul Griffin, their father had grown up as a farmer and engineer by trade later in life, and a firm but fair man. Their mother, incredibly creative, an artist, she was caring, kind, and sensitive. Growing up, despite not having a lot of money, the family would never go without. The brothers speak of pleasant memories where their father turned a school bus into a camper, and he would take them all out on trips, camping holidays, and hiking adventures. They were all very active and would do a lot of outdoor sports together. One example would be in winter, when a nearby lake froze over. They'd all go out together and ice skate around it. Creative to the core, every child would be involved in music in one way or another, and each of the Griffin siblings speak of their parents with high regard.
I wish you all could have met my family, could know my family. My parents were excellent dancers, and every Saturday night when we were at home, we'd camp out in the living room with our homemade pillows that my mom made us, and my parents would go to square dancing. And so Julie was the one that would babysit us, and a lot of times we got in trouble, but and caused a lot of trouble for Julie. But I learned quickly that if she sat on me and tickled me, I was done.
Paul Griffin, depicted on screen now, tells of tragedy that had struck his family before Julie was born. They had another brother who was involved in an incident when he was very young. Other children jumped on top of him, and this is often called a dog pile, or in Australia, most well known as stacks on. The young boy was critically injured and eventually passed away. Their mother was said to have been devastated by this loss, and it was believed to be a factor that contributed to an alcohol addiction which she struggled with for the rest of her life. Despite her problems with alcohol, it is said that she hid it well. So well, in fact, that none of the children knew anything was wrong. And when Paul left home at the age of 18, he still didn't know about it, only learning of her alcoholism at the age of 22, when their mother had a seizure at Julie's wedding dinner rehearsal. Upon learning that her mother had a drinking problem, Julie was said to have been significantly upset. It affected her so much that she would go to AA meetings to try and learn ways in which she could assist her mother, to implement strategies for recovery, and to avoid enabling behaviors. Despite her efforts, Julie's mother would pass away in a swimming pool accident in 1991, and her father would also pass away in 1996 from brain cancer. In regards to her father, Julie did whatever she could and looked after him with her brothers whilst he was sick. Julie was known to be a brilliant person with incredible intelligence, having a deep love for people and a desire to help. After leaving school, she would gravitate towards the medical field in college, and it is here where she met her husband-to-be, Mark Jensen. Julie meets Mark in 1981 in college, and he's studying finance. Quickly, their relationship would become serious, and the two were described as being very much in love. They were a very outdoorsy couple, and they would go away together on hiking trips, camping and snow adventures. By the summer of 1984, Julie and Mark were married, and they purchased a house in the Carroll Beach neighborhood of Pleasant Prairie. a location described as beautiful, with a tight-knit community of residents. In January of 1990, Mark and Julie would have their first child, David Jensen. Growing up, David would recall some very fond memories that he spent with his mother, flashbacks of going on fishing trips to Lake Tahoe, and playing in their family pool together, sitting alongside her in the kitchen on a small plastic table which was titled the Arts and Crafts area. Unfortunately though, with the introduction of David into their family, came some problems in Julie and Mark's relationship. Throughout the early months of their son David's life, Julie is suffering from postpartum depression, and she's struggling emotionally. She says that Mark is insensitive to her situation, and their relationship deteriorates somewhat.
When I first met them, their relationship seemed fine, but as time went on with the kids, things became strained.
How would you describe how things were in the Jensen marriage when David was a baby?
When David was a baby, he was born with, he was very colicky when he was born. And so Paul and I would go down there in the evenings to help Julie out with the baby. She did, the cooking and preparing of meals, and David would be real fussy at that time. And so we would go down and help her with the baby.
And did you see Mark assisting with David?
No, Mark didn't have a lot of interaction with David when he was a little baby.
And was that a source of stress to Julie?
Yes, it was. Mark was very demanding of Julie's time. When the baby was fussy or needed attention, Mark also seemed to need attention at that point. He could be very condescending to her when she would speak.
And Julie became a stay-at-home mother, right?
Yes, she did.
Not too long after David was born, right?
Right.
And did Mark have an opinion of stay-at-home mothers?
Yes, he did. He did not respect stay-at-home moms.
And so Julie was aware of that negative opinion?
Yes.
As you heard, he held a lack of respect for stay-at-home mums and would tell a co-worker, quote, "Women who don't work and spend all their time at home looking after children become brain dead," end quote. Things seem to get to a point where the couple are not in a good place at all. And at her husband's request, on June 29, 1990, Julie would see a psychotherapist by the name of Paul DeFazio. The doctor notices signs of depression following her baby's birth. He doesn't want to diagnose her with depression prematurely. So instead, Julie is diagnosed with adult situational reaction with mixed features, which is essentially an adult reacting to a situation, and they are showing signs of depression and anxiety. These signs that the doctor took note of were: Julie was crying all the time, and it was difficult for her to leave for work, as she'd feel guilt over leaving the baby. She was experiencing anxiety and guilt related to her husband feeling like she is too emotionally involved with the child. She had lost her appetite and no longer enjoyed cooking, something that she once loved. Julie would see this doctor for almost a year, and for a portion of that time, she had been prescribed Prozac to treat depression. Some of these sessions, Mark Jensen would also attend. As these visits to Paul DeFazio occurred almost 3 decades ago, the doctor doesn't have any personal recollection of them, so all of this information is coming from notes he had taken during those appointments. And his notes related to the sessions where Mark were present are as follows. Mark wanted to make changes. She dropped out of nursing school, and this was important to him. They were going through highs and lows. He thinks she is fixated on the 7-month-old baby. She has stopped breastfeeding. There are fears that she will end up like her mother. The final session that Julie would have with Paul DeFazio was June 18th, 1991. And in this one, Julie would say that she doesn't feel as though progress is happening quick enough. She ends the session saying that she will seek marriage counseling. Shortly after this date, still in the same month of June, Julie files for divorce, but retracts it the month following for reasons unknown. Over the next few years, up until 1998, there are no recorded instances of any more sessions with psychologists or the like. Friends and family don't recall any notable problems either. And in 1995, another child, Doug Jensen, is born. People recall seeing the Jensens all playing together in the front yard as a family, and generally they seemed to be living the ideal family life. A quote from a neighbor: "Julie and Mark would always be outside, always working on some kind of project, just laughing and having fun with it. It was amazing to watch them." End quote. It would seem that everything was going well for the couple on the surface, but below, the Jensens were plagued with a rather disturbing and odd problem. Someone had been harassing their family for years and years, starting in 1991 and ending in 1998. It had all begun in 91, whilst Mark and Julie's relationship was on the rocks. Julie Jensen at this time would begin to get very close with her co-worker, Perry Tarika, a man whom she had been working with for 2 years leading up to this. Julie and Perry were both having troubles in their respective marriages, and they would talk to each other often about their problems. Even once, Julie accompanied Perry to a divorce lawyer for moral support. And on another occasion, Julie had told Perry of a strange and controlling behavior from her husband Mark. She had discovered that Mark was recording her phone calls using a tape recorder. Julie would secretly retrieve one of these tapes and play it for Perry, whom after listening to it says he found this to be incredibly concerning. Perry advises her that when she returns the tape back where she found it, she must put it back exactly as it was found, so that Mark is not aware it went missing at all.
Did you develop a friendship with her?
Yes, a very close one. Julie was the kindest woman I have ever met in my life. She was a great mother. She loved children. She was the finest woman I have ever known. And that was the opinion of many others, because it wasn't only my observation. It was the people that she had worked with previously. They all thought highly about her.
And you had one sexual encounter with her over a 2-day period?
That is correct.
And where did that take place?
At her home in Pleasant Prairie.
At some point during the course of that time that you were with her for that 2-day period, I presume her husband, Mark Jensen, was away at that time?
Yes, he was.
And after that one episode, of that one sexual episode, did you continue to have your relationship with Julie Jensen or not?
No.
What happened?
She called it off. I don't know for what she made a decision, and I accepted it.
So you accepted when she called it off?
Yes.
Did you want to continue this relationship with Julie?
I would have, but she did not want to.
After this sexual encounter with Perry, Julie leaves her work the following day and cuts off all ties with the man. She eventually tells her husband about the affair and says that she is ashamed it had happened, promising to never keep anything from him again. Both Mark and Julie choose to continue with their marriage, working together to move beyond this. Yet it is said by many that Mark was unable to let go or move on from the negative feelings he had surrounding his wife's affair.
Did you ever get the impression that Mark Jensen had ever come to terms with or forgiven Julie for that one affair that she'd had in early 90 or 91?
No, he was seriously hurt and angered, and from very early on when I first met him, that came across right up until the very end. He never got over it.
Not long after Julie had told her husband of the affair, strange things had started happening around their house. Multiple hang-up phone calls each day to both their home and Mark's office, and pornographic images were being found or left around the outside of their house, on their car, and being sent to Mark's work. These images looked like Xerox prints, not actual photographs. They were mostly black and white, and the content would either be that of an erect penis or a woman and man engaged in a sex act together. Quite often, the women in these images would be in positions where their face was hidden or not easily seen, and the photos were taken in such a way that the location of the couple was quite ambiguous. This was a great source of despair for Julie. The implication that Julie may be the woman in the photos would get to her, and she worries that somehow, maybe Perry may have taken some of these photos without her knowledge. In 1992, Julie contacts the authorities and tells them about this harassment. Due to the sensitive nature of her concerns, Julie requests if she can deal with only one officer if she ever needs to come to the police in the future with these matters. They agree, and the officer she speaks with is Ron Cosman. Over the years, he has over 50 communications with Julie regarding this issue, and at one point, he sets up a phone trace to try and track the caller.
And each of those times, when the trace was installed or the system was installed, what happened with respect to the harassing phone calls?
She had advised me that the calls had stopped.
Each and every time?
Correct. I became very suspicious that it would have to be someone who was aware that the traces were being put on the line. At that particular time, there were only 3 people that knew the traces were being put on the phone. Mark Jensen, Julie Jensen, and myself.
So, come time for the third trace, when the harassing phone call started up again, did you offer any advice to Julie Jensen?
I asked her if she would not tell anyone, including Mark, that this be just between her and I. I explained to her at that particular point my concerns that Mark may be making the phone calls. She did not feel that Mark would do that. So I stopped by, I think it would have been probably about 4 days after the trace had been activated, to find out if there had been any more phone calls.
And what did she say?
She said the calls had stopped.
And what did you say?
Judging by her demeanor, she would not look me in the eye. She was looking down. And I asked her at that point if she had told Mark about the trace. And she said she had. And I believe I made a comment at that point of, Julie, why did you do that? Kind of in a disgusted language. And apparently I was a little loud, because I do recall one of the children being asleep inside the home and woke up, so I may have been a little boisterous at that point.
So you were upset with her?
Absolutely.
And did she offer you an explanation as to why she told Mark?
She did not want to keep any more secrets from him. She felt bad because she had the affair, she kept that a secret, and she wanted to keep no more secrets from Mark whatsoever.
Officer Cosman speaks to Mark Jensen and asks him to set up a camera in locations around their house and his office, to point the camera out the window facing his car, and to try film the culprit in the act as they place these photos on his vehicle. Mark agrees to do this and says that although he recorded multiple times, he was never able to find anything.
Did Julie ever indicate to you what Mark was saying about these harassing phone calls, what he would say to her about these harassing phone calls, or what he would say to her about these photos that were being allegedly left around the house?
He just was angry that she had the affair and basically blamed her for all the problems.
And how was Julie reacting to this accusation that all of these things were taking place because of that affair she'd had so many years ago?
I was taking emotional strain on her and her marriage.
In 1996, the Jensens would hire a PI to investigate this matter, and David Ellis conducts one session of surveillance on Mark's car whilst it's parked at his office. During this, he doesn't observe anything out of the ordinary. Despite the investigator wanting to continue surveillance, Julie calls shortly after hiring him and cancels his services, offering no explanation why. Prior to this, though, during one of his conversations that David had had with Julie, the investigator would say that he looked over these images that had been left around their house and informed Julie that not only he doesn't believe it was her in the images, but he suspects that it could be her husband Mark who was leaving them around. Officer Ron Cosman also feels the same way, suspecting Jensen. Yet Julie does not want to hear it. She continues to feel shame that it could be her in the photos, and she does not want to point the finger at Mark. When Julie had first contacted police, Officer Cosman advised her that she should keep a log of all of the harassment, to which she did, in meticulous detail.
This was located in the Jensen bedroom in her desk area there, or the dresser.
And she's describing predominantly hang-up calls at this point, correct?
Yes.
All the way through December 3rd, 1992. She describes how mailbox parts are being ordered because they had problems with a variety of other issues like the mailbox and flat tires on Mark's truck.
Correct.
And from September 6th to September 27th, 95, there was a trap and trace, and there were no calls to report?
Correct.
Then October 25th, the hang-up calls start again. And on November 95 through January 96, she's indicating very active, calling Mark's office and leaving photos, correct?
Correct.
And then more of these instances, and now there's pictures left on Mark's truck.
Correct.
On March 21st, and then March 28th, another hang-up call.
Yes, all in 96.
And she has more records of hang-up calls. And on April 17th, she's talking about pictures left on Mark's truck at the office, correct?
Correct.
And again, she makes reference to hang-up calls and several calls for Mark at the office, and hang-up calls at home.
Correct.
She checked license plates on vehicles.
Yes.
She had a conversation with you on May 10th, 1996. Caller ID. There's a tap on the phone. And then more out-of-area calls, more hang-up calls through June, July of 96.
Yes.
She's keeping notes of everything that's happening, correct?
Yes. She's doing a very good job.
And then we're going through a number of pages here, more records of more hang-up calls, more pics left on Mark's truck at the office, pics left at Mark's truck in the office, tape messages to his office, phone calls to Mark's office, hang-ups at home. And then we get to January 19th, 1998. She underlines the word new tactics, live on internet, correct?
That is correct.
These new tactics that Julie begins to document refer to emails that Mark Jensen is starting to receive. The harasser had somehow obtained his email address and was now incorporating this new digital avenue into their tirade of pornographic bombardment.
Julie Jensen notes in this log an email that's part of the harassment. Here's the email. You'll see that it's from someone by the name of Turtle, that's the name in the email, to Mark Jensen. And then you'll see in the text of the email, consistent with the harassment, here's a few for Jay, so Julie, of me soft. Also a shot I took without her knowing it of a married girl in the office I'm currently doing at a nearby hotel. Attached to this email are three pornographic images of nude males, and then what looks like a surreptitious image taken of a topless woman in a hotel room.
April 29th at 6:33 p.m., another email, and then on April 30th, another email, correct?
Correct.
May 5th email, May 6th email, correct?
Yes.
So now she's keeping track of the emails that they're getting.
That is correct.
Law enforcement look into Perry Tarika as a possible suspect, but they quickly rule him out, as he no longer lived in the state of Wisconsin, moving to North Carolina shortly after he lost contact with Julie. Perry has a solid alibi, and it is deemed impossible for him to be the one making both the phone calls and leaving the images. As mentioned earlier, in the face of this harassment, throughout these years, the Jensens maintained an image of quite the happy family. By spring of 1991, Julie had left work and was a full-time mum. She would also spend her days caring for the children of her friends and family. Around 1995, Julie's sister-in-law, Laura Costa, a woman who also claims to be Julie's best friend, was leaving her young son Drake in Julie's care 5 days a week, and had been for around 2 years, when in 1995, she reports a rather strange occurrence at Julie's house.
I don't think she was that happy in watching all of those multiple children. So it was just a situation where there was a couple things that had built that I was noticing that I was just watching. But then there was an incident where she called me at work one day and was really yelling at me, which is not Julie's demeanor at all. And she just said that I needed to get home and get home now, and that the kids had like feces all over the walls. And I was like, what? And so I left work, drove home, and I called Mark and I said, you need to get your ass home, excuse me, because I don't know what's going on, but there's something wrong. And when I got there, he had beat me because he didn't have to drive as far as I did. And
How far of a drive was it for you?
25 to 30 minutes. So he was there, and the kids were there, and there really wasn't anything wrong.
So there wasn't feces?
No.
Was there anything to indicate that there had been cleaning happening?
No.
In September of 1998, Julie would speak to their family GP about pressures in her life. During this visit, the doctor believed her to be facing minor depression due to marital problems and feelings that her husband had never forgiven her for the affair in '91. In the months leading up to December of 1998, A few people close to Julie had become aware of these marital problems. As she told them, she felt as though her husband didn't love her anymore. She says that Mark had become incredibly critical of her, and they would argue constantly, with him telling her that she's an unfit mother and a poor influence for their children. On top of this, Mark had been doing longer work hours, going away on a lot more work trips, and not coming home, even if the locations he went were less than an hour's drive away. Julie says that she never knew what he wanted from her, as it always seemed to change. Here is a quote from one of her close friends. Mark had wanted Julie to be more sexually experimental. She said to me, "Mark wants me to be like these other women, his friends. They go to the bars, 3 a.m. They go to the strip clubs, drinking. I'm not that. I don't want it." End quote. Ted and Margaret Voigt were neighbours of the Jensens, and they were very close with Julie. As Julie's marriage cracked more and more, she would begin discussing her problems with the Voigts on a daily basis.
I noticed that Julie was sitting in the front of the house on the bench, and she was like leaning down with her hands out on the railings, and she was crying. She had her head down, the hands kind of spread out, and you can hear her cry. And then she pulled her head up. She had tears on her face, she was all red, and she started saying they had another big argument this morning. She had it with it. The situation in the house has got very intense. They will have a daily arguments, few times a day. And one of the biggest things she said, she thinks Mark has got another woman.
Did you notice anything about Mark Jensen and Kelly Labonte?
Yeah, they got rather close.
What do you mean by that?
A personal relationship, if you will.
You're saying that Mark Jensen and Kelly Labonte were in some office?
They were in one of the offices behind closed doors most of the time. It was awkward in the fact that, do you open the door, do you talk? I mean, so it was not a good situation.
It became romantic, and I don't know exactly when that occurred.
Tell us about the conversation that you can recall having between you and Mark Jensen concerning the impact this affair could have on his marriage.
We talked about it, and he had mentioned that he was going to see her on weekends and such. And I just suggested to him that it wasn't a good idea. And part of the conversation was always the hurt and anger that he felt over the affair that his wife had had years earlier. And in a way, he was trying to use that as a justification for what he was doing, and I strongly suggested to him that it wasn't a good idea.
This email that we're looking at from you to the defendant, it says, "Thanks again for yesterday. What a wonderful idea you had and a wonderful time we had." Now the following line begins with the letters IDLY.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
What do those letters stand for?
I do love you.
All right, so then that line would be, "I do love you even more now, but no surprise, you are too wonderful for words."
Yes.
And then XO, talk to you soon, correct?
Yes.
Do we see his reply to you?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In that reply, he says, "Thank you. Hey, came in this morning and my blinds were up, and I do like those knobs. IDLY, cheers." If we look at this email from the defendant to you, this is 2:44 p.m. the same day. What does he say there in that email?
Wouldn't mind knobs on my blinds, would prefer cheeks on my desk. Cheers. Did you smile?
So he's flirting with you.
Yes.
And then at the very top, your reply.
If you continue to be a good boy, maybe you'll get what you wish for. I would enjoy participating. Yes, I smiled. I always smile when talking with you.
Okay, so you're receptive to the flirting.
Yes.
For this particular email chain from September 4th of 1998, it starts with questions about lunch plans.
Right.
The defendant says to you, "Know what I'd rather eat," and
Yes.
then there's certain symbols.
Yes.
Okay, what is he saying?
He's making a sexual connotation.
Sometimes when you were communicating with the defendant, would you complain to each other about your current significant others?
Yes.
Does he say, I'm going to have to go home and try to fix my high-maintenance woman. If I stopped and got Titanic on the way home, wonder if I could get her to sit next to me on the couch. Low expectations. Is he complaining about his wife when he calls her dutiful thing?
Yes.
Right now, dutiful would do, nah, cheers. Thinking about my desk right now, now that's a way to enjoy lunch. Is he talking about a sexual encounter with his wife in these emails?
Yes.
And then, once again, he's referring to his penis when he says there wasn't a Boy Scout issue?
Yes.
All right, so he's describing this sexual encounter with his wife to you?
Yes.
You are such an incredible man, I want one.
Yes.
Correct. And then he responds, thanks, you can have me.
Yes.
You call him a tease. He responds, who's teasing?
Yes.
And then your response is, I could get used to having you around permanently. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And so this is all on September 4th of 98?
Yes.
September through to November, the email threads back and forth between Mark and Kelly continue in this manner, as the two delve further into exploring what a relationship could look like between them. Throughout this period of time, Mark and Julie's marriage becomes so heavily strained that Julie would tell her brother's wife, once the holiday period is over, she is going to divorce Mark. A concern she had, though, in regards to divorcing him, was custody over the children, and she would say that she fears Mark might attempt to make her look crazy so that she could never see them again. This fear stemmed from an argument she had had with Mark. According to Julie's brother, Mark had told Julie once that he had never wanted a family, the complete opposite of what Julie wanted, and through this argument, he would tell her if she ever leaves him, he'll make sure that she never sees the kids again. Whilst their marriage sounds horribly turbulent, one strange thing that is noticed is that the harassment that had been ongoing for almost a decade had stopped.
August 17, 1998, an out-of-area hang-up call at home at 10:37 a.m., correct?
That is correct.
And there's no more entries after August 17, 1998.
Correct.
About the time that Mark Jensen struck up a relationship with Kelly Labonte.
That is correct.
Around this time in 1998, Julie was doing casual work at her son's school as a room mother, and here she had become quite close with one of the teachers, Therese DeFazio. Therese would recall a day in November where Julie would share something with her that was incredibly alarming.
We went into the side room at about 10:30. She'd been doing fine all morning, and then we brought him into the side room, and I said, "Is something bothering you?" And she was kind of like doing this with her hands. I says, "Come on, tell me, what's the matter?" She says, "So I don't think I should tell you." She goes, and I said, "Well, when you're ready, I'm here for you, I'll listen." And she thought for a few seconds, and she says, "Well, I'd like to tell you something. I think my husband was going to kill me last weekend." And I looked at her surprised. I said, "That's not something you hear from a parent." And I said, I repeated, I says, "You said what?" And she said, "That he was going to kill me." I said, "You know what, we better have this conversation down in privacy in the teacher's lounge," because I didn't know if anybody could hear us from the side room. So we proceeded down to the lounge, in the teacher's lounge, to talk about it.
When we got down there, I looked her straight in the eyes and I said, "Now you said you think your husband is going to kill you." I said, "Why do you think your husband's going to kill you? What is he doing?" She said, "He has been turning off his computer or turning it away from me every single time I come into his area by the computer."
She noticed that Mark was on the computer and doing the research. I mean, he was looking on the screen about the poisoning and everything. And at the point, Mark got really suspicious because she was staring at the screen. He took his foot and he just slammed the door, closed the door in the front of her face.
She said, "I was cleaning one day and I went by the computer and saw, when I was dusting, that there was a list of items on a piece of paper. And they were items such as syringes," she said, "and drugs and items like that."
And she wasn't thinking he ever needed a syringe or a needle or anything, so she just couldn't understand why that note was there.
She was very confused and scared because there was some times that Mark left to work and he left his computer on. And on the screen of the computer, there was the website or about the poisoning and everything. So then she will come out to me and talk to me about it, and she's like, I don't know what he's trying to do to me, if he's like trying to scare me, he's playing with my mind, or he just forgot to turn it off. He will just leave it on all day long. For her to see it, or she couldn't figure out what was going on. Her very suspicious was that he's trying to poison her, or he's trying to drive her nuts to take away the kiss from her, because that's what one of the arguments they had, that he was scaring her that she was an unfit mother. He will take the kids away from her. I told her to contact the police, and she actually, I think she did at the time, did contact the police. I think so. It was Mr. Kosman or somebody.
It was a message from Julie Jensen, and she asked that I call her as soon as I return from my trip. There was a second message, again from Julie Jensen, and stated to call me as soon as possible, and if she were to end up dead, Mark would be her first suspect. I gave her a call and she asked if I could stop over after 10 o'clock. She wanted to talk to me. She sounded confused, a little afraid.
Ron Kosman talks with Julie for around 45 minutes on that day, and he says over the course of this discussion, Julie had begun to calm down. She would even say to him that possibly her concerns could be her emotions running wild. The officer tells her that if she fears for her life at any point, she should contact him or the police department immediately. He also gives her information on a woman's shelter, but she turns this down, repeating that she was probably being emotional and overreacting. Ted Voigt offers for Julie and her children to stay at his lakeside property. He says he'd give her a few $1,000s and she can hide out there whilst figuring it all out. And much like Officer Kosman, Therese DeFazio urges her to contact authorities or to stay at the woman's shelter. Laura Costa says that Julie can stay with her, or if that makes her uncomfortable seeing as she's Mark's sister, she advises that Julie should contact her brother Paul, who would certainly take her and the kids in. Julie turns all of these offers down and states that she is not even sure that what she suspects is the truth. She goes back and forth in her mind. Sometimes she thinks Mark is going to kill her, and other times she thinks that he's trying to make her look and feel crazy, so that she tells everyone he's trying to kill her. Then when someone investigates, he can easily get rid of all the evidence, thus making her look like an unfit mother. Friends and family also recall that Julie adamantly insists she will not leave her children behind. They were her life, and she refused to do anything that could put them in harm's way. She was not going to abandon them. So amidst all of these complicated fears, and harboring uncertainty that her suspicions were even correct, Julie stays in the family home and chooses not to leave. Mark would have a much different perspective on all of this and what was going on here. He would tell friends and co-workers that Julie was sinking further and further into depression and mental illness. He describes her as crazy, unhinged, and abusing over-the-counter medications. He says that Julie was drastically losing weight, that she's always unhappy, unmotivated, and that he had serious concerns for their children's well-being. An example of this was one day he came home from work and found both boys naked in separate rooms. It is not explained why this happened. One of the people Mark was talking about with these problems was friend of the family and co-worker, David Naring.
What was he telling you about Julie's condition?
A lot of things. He said that she was depressed, that she didn't want to do anything, that she was losing weight. He said that I wouldn't recognize her if I saw her. She had lost so much weight.
So when you heard him talking about Julie in this fashion, were you concerned about Julie?
Yes, of course.
So what, if anything, did you do in response to your concern about Julie?
We had not seen them together in a long time because of the ongoing relationship that was developing with Kelly Labonte. So I talked to my wife about it and asked her if she'd give Julie a call and take her out to lunch and maybe cheer her up.
So did you call Julie Jensen?
Yes.
And did you end up asking her to go out to lunch?
Yes.
And do you remember where you went for lunch?
I didn't until I reread the testimony, but Culver's, I know we did fast food, but it was Culver's in Kenosha.
When you had this lunch with Julie, do you recall whether you were looking for the signs that Mark Jensen had conveyed to your husband about Julie being depressed and lost weight and gaunt and depressed and things like that?
I wasn't doing an examination, but I was there to just talk to her and see how she was. She drove herself there. She brought Douglas in. We sat down. We had a conversation. We had a meal. I did not see that she looked sick. I'm not a doctor. I understand that. But she looked fine to me.
Did you have some perception of Julie Jensen's weight or body mass in September and her weight and body mass in November?
She looked about the same.
Did you notice any changes in her physical appearance?
No.
How was Mrs. Jensen's appearance in the November book club?
Didn't see any difference from any other time.
December 1st, 1998. Julie makes another visit to the family GP.
And it was at the end of the morning. We worked her in. It seemed like she needed to be seen. And she was miserable and depressed and decreased appetite, having some diarrhea, talking about marital problems. She specifically denied being suicidal or homicidal and denied any domestic violence that anybody was doing to her. And again, we discussed her strong family history and then her past history of Prozac and some counseling. She was tearful, but she was clear and appropriate.
Did it have her weight at that point?
Yes, 115, which is 8.5 pounds less than she was 3 months ago. So I talked with her. She was distraught. She was in tears. And we discussed some options and thought that at least a short-term go with an antidepressant would be indicated. I had, back when we had sample closets, I had some Paxil in the closet, and I gave her several.
You said that you asked her if she was suicidal or homicidal.
Yes.
And what was her response?
No, definitely not. I mean, she loved her boys, and she would do nothing to hurt them, and they meant everything to her.
Had you ever seen her in this state before?
Never.
In the months leading up to December 1998, as Julie disclosed more and more of her issues to the Voights, Margaret would begin to feel as though they were getting too involved and decides to remove herself from the situation, urging her husband to do the same. Ted said he was unable to do this as he felt as though Julie relied on him. Some days he would notice her standing around by the fence line, waiting for him to walk over so that she could chat for a bit and vent. He said he feels that Julie had no one to discuss her concerns with, and that he was one of the few people that truly took her seriously. Ted is speaking to Julie on a daily basis, and this friendship between the two causes much friction in the Voight household, as Margaret barely has any communications with Julie anymore, and does not approve of what her husband is doing. So, on December 2nd, when Julie places a rather strange phone call to Margaret in the morning hours, Margaret becomes quite concerned.
She said, "Hi, it's Julie. The reason I'm calling is because you're not going to see me outside today, and I know if you don't, you're going to worry that something is wrong." And I already knew something was wrong because her voice was very shaky and it sounded like she was drunk, and so I knew something's going on. So I asked her, "Julie, what's wrong?" And she said, whoa, the medication I took, I didn't know they're gonna have such an effect on me. But she never indicated what medication, and I didn't ask her. So I keep asking if she needs any help. And she said, "No, Mark is being good to me. Mark took the kids to school, and he's going to a doctor for me."
Mark appeared at the window of my office. He was concerned that Julie was not sleeping, thought that if she could get some sleep, she might feel better. So I gave him a prescription for her of a few Ambien and strongly reinforced the follow-up either with me or a psychiatrist, psychologist, and that to the emergency room if worse, and then suggested that they reduce the Paxil by half for a few days.
I keep asking, let me do something, and she just keeps saying no and repeating that Mark is being good to her.
How long would you say that conversation lasted?
I would say it was probably 15 minutes because I keep repeating. I didn't want to hang up.
Why not?
I felt something's wrong.
How did Julie sound in terms of her emotional state? Did she sound concerned?
No, she did not. She said, I'm okay, but she didn't sound okay.
It was suspicious to me that Mark stayed home because as long as I know Mark and Julie, and that's one of the things that Julie will say, he will never miss a day off work. Even if she was sick or she has some problems or her dad died or something, he wouldn't take a day off to go to the funeral or wake or something with her. It just, you deal with it.
The next day, December 3rd, Mark calls his office in the morning and tells one of his colleagues that his wife is very sick and he doesn't know what to do. His co-worker urges Mark to contact a doctor or to take her to the emergency room, and around 5 hours later, Mark calls 911 and requests that they come to his house, as Julie is reported to be unconscious and unresponsive in her bed.
So it indicates you were called to the location for a PNB female. Can you tell us what a PNB female is?
PNB is an abbreviation for pulseless non-breather.
Dispatch stated there was a possible F frank. What's an F frank?
Fatality, which means somebody that they believe is not going to be able to be resuscitated.
It describes that you found her lying face down in the bed. Is that accurate?
That is correct. She was lying on her left side, covered in blankets, in what we call a semi-fetal position, meaning her knees were slightly bent. The only other thing I noticed in the room was that the phone was off the hook and making that classic sound that a phone that's off the hook makes.
Did you put the phone back on the hook again?
I did.
There was rigidity and pulling of blood in the face and left side?
That's correct. The technical term would be rigor mortis. My training experience tells me that that patient has been down for a considerable amount of time, in excess of 30 minutes, which is beyond help, and us have the ability to do a resuscitation on that patient.
When you say down, you mean dead?
That is correct, sir.
In the afternoon, I was home, and I heard a siren, then I heard another siren, then another siren, and the sirens were stopping right in front of Julie's house. So we walk over there, and again, we saw there was a fire truck, there was a fire rescue vehicle, police cars. I think there was an ambulance, but a lot of activity. So I walked up to a police officer, and I just basically said, is there any way I can help? I'm Julie's friend. If there's any kind of a fire, she can come to my house, and they're willing to stay there. Just let me know if there's anything I can do. And he looked at me, he said, I'm sorry she didn't make it. And I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, I'm sorry she didn't make it. And I'm like, you don't expect to hear that. That's the last thing you expect to hear when you're thinking you're going over to see a friend.
One of the officer at that time came out and he started asking a question, are we the neighbors, this or that? And I asked him, is she dead? He didn't want to answer to me, and then Jim looked at me finally. He said, is she dead? She's dead. And finally he admitted, yes, she's dead. And he started asking me my name. I just walked away. I couldn't take it anymore. Just went home.
As I was getting closer to the house,
I saw all the police cars, the ambulance. I already knew something very bad had happened. I went in the house and I saw my younger daughter and my husband sitting on the couch. My daughter was crying. My husband was very, very upset. He was upset at me too. He said, "You told me to stay away. You told me to not get involved. And look what happened."
Mark tells police on the scene that she was taking medication for depression, along with sleeping pills and other over-the-counter meds, and he believes that she either purposefully overdosed or had some sort of negative reaction to the medications. Initial thoughts is that this may be a suicide, but DA Robert Jambois, who was one of the first on scene, has his suspicions. He would say, quote, "I had a lot of questions about what I found inside the house. 40-year-old women don't drop dead for no reason. It didn't look right." End quote. December 4th, an autopsy is conducted, and although a cause of death is unable to be determined, there are some unexplained injuries to Julie. Things such as very light petechiae around her lungs, heart, and chest cavity. Minor injuries, which the examiner says could indicate asphyxiation, but on their own are not enough to be able to confirm it. Two other injuries which are important to note include Julie's nose being pushed so far to one side that when rigor mortis set in, it was locked in that position. And second, there was hemorrhaging on the left side of her ribcage, in the very spot where her arm was found positioned underneath her body.
I was also concerned in what was called to my attention is her nose. You can see it's evident when you look over the body and all that her nose is crooked here. I haven't seen that before. I don't know if it was any relevance at the time. However, I wanted to make sure I documented the redness in her eye and curvature of her nose.
I would say the hemorrhage that's on the rib cage would need to be explained to put that in the category of positional asphyxia. And to produce that type of hemorrhage, you look at the evidence around how she's found. She's in a soft mattress, which should not produce hemorrhage of the rib cage. The other components, as I mentioned, the nose and pillow, could be seen in cases of positional asphyxia. So we have something that's not explained and something that is not produced by a mattress, hemorrhage of the muscles of the rib cage.
Seeing as the autopsy is unable to find a solid cause or manner of death, additional toxicological studies are requested. The very next day after Julie had passed, Ted Voigt contacts police with an incredible piece of evidence. 2 weeks prior to her death, Julie had written a letter and sealed it, then handed it to Ted, asking him to give this to police should anything happen to her. Ted provides this sealed letter to the lead detective on the case, and an expert concludes that this is indeed Julie's handwriting. The letter reads as follows. Pleasant Prairie Police Department. Ron Cosman or Detective Ratzberg. I took this picture and am writing this on Saturday, 11/21/98 at 7 a.m. This list was in my husband's business daily planner, not meant for me to see. I don't know what it means, but if anything happens to me, he would be my first suspect. Our relationship has deteriorated to the polite superficial. I know he's never forgiven me for the brief affair I had with that creep 7 years ago. Mark lives for work and the kids. He's an avid surfer of the internet. Anyway, I do not smoke or drink. My mother was an alcoholic, so I limit my drinking to 1 or 2 a week. Mark wants me to drink more, with him in the evenings. I don't. I would never take my life because of my kids. They are everything to me. I regularly take Tylenol and multivitamins. Occasionally take over-the-counter stuff for colds, Ramtac or Imodium. Have 1 prescription for migraine tablets, which Mark uses more than I. I pray I'm wrong and nothing happens, but I am suspicious of Mark's suspicious behaviours and fear for my early demise. However, I will not leave David and Douglas, my life's greatest love, accomplishment and wish, my 3 Ds, Daddy, Mark, David and Douglas. Julie Jensen. On April 21st, 1999, the detective brings Mark in for questioning.
But we need to find out what happened here.
Oh, I did not do anything to hurt her. There was a question between myself and the kids that morning whether or not to call an ambulance. Her breathing was funny. She could hardly get out of bed. I mean, it was a god-awful situation.
Here in your statement, Wednesday, December 3rd, Julie Lee could hardly move. Your 9 p.m. told me that she was fine and she wanted to commit suicide. And on Wednesday morning, Julie asked me not to call anyone, meaning not to call her help. She wanted to die, right?
Yeah.
So on Wednesday
morning,
morning,
she asked me not to call anybody.
she's pretty bad off. Wednesday
She
morning.
wasn't looking good. She couldn't. No motor control.
Should you call the rescue squad that Wednesday, you think? She was bad off enough to where you should have called the rescue squad, but she didn't want you to.
She didn't want me to. Well, all right, I should have. In hindsight, I know that.
So you didn't do anything to aid in her death, but you didn't do anything to stop her from dying.
I really didn't. I mean, I just watched it happen.
Years later, the detective admits that he indeed did use the tactic of lying to Mark during this interview at times. One such example of this is seeing as there were unexplained injuries believed to be a result of asphyxia. The detective throws his own theory at Mark to try and elicit a confession. Take note of what the detective says coming up, as it will hold importance later on.
See, like here's a picture of Julie, and you can see here, look at the nose, how it's bent, like it was pushed into a pillow, like somebody pushed it in there. I don't know how to explain that, Mark. You know, here's probably a better. I mean, that's almost looks like it's broken. I have Dr. Chambliss's report right here, which says it's basically an asphyxia death. She's suffocated. And the only way you can suffocate, Mark, is if you did something to her. A 41-year-old young female does just not stop breathing. You had to do something, Mark. Be honest with me. Be straight with me, Mark. Be a man. Tell me what happened here.
Nothing more than what I told her.
You didn't get on top of her?
No.
Well, the evidence suggests is that there was a pillow over her head. If you recall, you saw the nose, same as I did. I got pictures of it.
Right.
Okay? You saw the nose and put a pillow over her head.
No.
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 Mark, how did she stop breathing, Mark? Be straight with me. Be honest.
When I found her,
Mark, you had to do something.
I did not fall.
How can I explain this?
I don't know.
I don't know. You know, she contacts us a couple days before, and she leaves us this letter. Okay? Then all of a sudden, boom, she turns up dead. You know, I'm not making this up. This is true evidence. And here we have Julie Jensen telling me that if she dies, you're the person that did it. If anything happens to me, he would be my first suspect. I know he's never forgiven me for the brief affair I had with that creep 7 years ago. I have been doing this 15 years, Mark, and I've never had anybody leave me a letter telling me that if they die, it's this person that killed me.
Unfortunately, that is the only part of the interview that I could find which has somewhat decent audio. The rest that is available is truly difficult to sit through due to the quality. I've gone through the horror of it once, and I don't intend to put any of us through it again, hey? So I'll do my best to summarize some important key points now. Mark is lied to by the detective, and even though this analysis had not been conducted, he's told that the handwriting on the pornographic harassment images matches his own. Jensen cracks a little and admits that at times he did write some things on them, taunts and nefarious questions such as, "Is he as big as I am?" and "Remember when we did it like this?" but denies being the source. His story is that he would be getting bombarded daily with this stuff, and he didn't want to show it all to his wife because he knew how much it would upset her when he did. So what would happen is he would accumulate it all, stash them away and hide them somewhere so she wouldn't see them. But over time, as he kept receiving more and more, it would drive him mad, and he himself would get very upset at the situation and at Julie. That's when he would write these nasty things on them and show them to her. Mark says that on the morning of December 3rd, Julie was so sick that she couldn't get out of bed. She could barely talk, barely open her eyes. There was no conversation between them, and it appeared she could not move or function. He would bring water to her, and she could only nod her head. And with this basic form of communication, Mark says that she indicated to him that she was okay and didn't want to go to a doctor. He tells the detective that his son David was so worried about her that morning that he didn't want to go to school. He didn't want to leave his mother's side. He says that her breathing was heavy and raspy, and it sounded like her windpipe was being restricted. When he took the kids to school, she was so out of it that they had to prop her up so that they could give her a hug and a kiss goodbye. The kids tell her that they love her, and Mark promises them that if she's still sick after school, he'll take her to the hospital. Mark says that when he checked on her before he went to work, her breathing had sounded better, no more wheezing. So he rolled her from her back to her side to make sure that she didn't choke on vomit should she become sick. And this was the position they found her in. He indicates that he administered 3 Ambien sleeping pills to Julie, one after receiving them from the doctor on the afternoon of the 2nd, another that night, then a third the next morning. Mark says he thought he was helping Julie sleep through the sickness as she was requesting them. The detective at one point applies some pressure and confronts Mark with the emails that were exchanged between he and Kelly Labonte. Mark lies and says that Kelly is nothing more than a friend, a secretary for his boss, and all of these emails are work-related. The detective is not having a bar of it and presses more. He reads some of the exchanges and says that that sounds more than work-related business. Again, Mark states that this is workplace banter, but he does admit that he and Kelly are dating as of the time of the interview. He stresses that nothing sexual had occurred between them at any point before Julie's death. Once this interview is concluded, Mark is released. It's not until March 19, 2002, that the toxicology results are officially finalized. It is discovered that in addition to Ambien, Paxil, Benadryl and Librium all in Julie's system, the one that was of most importance was ethylene glycol, the chemical in antifreeze. Through this case, I've learned quite a bit about ethylene glycol poisoning, and I'll share some of that now. Ethylene glycol poisoning occurs after an individual consumes even a small amount of the substance, as little as 30 milliliters, and the onset of the effects can start as early as 30 minutes after consumption. Stage 1 of the poisoning has similar effects to that of beverage alcohol. An individual feels drunk, they have slurred speech, loss of coordination and so forth. At its most extreme, one can experience seizures or even coma. Stage 2 occurs between 12 to 24 hours after ingestion, and it sees an individual begin to develop some very unpleasant symptoms as the ethylene glycol is processed into glycolic acid. This acid builds up in major organs such as the heart, lungs, liver and kidneys, and it causes enormous damage. In this stage, not only will the person feel awful, in pain and terribly sick, they can experience hyperventilation, deep and abnormal breathing, the heart pounding, nausea, renal failure, blood in the urine and vomit, and diarrhea. In stage 3, crystals begin to form after acid combines with calcium in the person's blood. These crystals lodge in the kidneys and cause major organ failure, heart and renal failure. This occurs anywhere between 24 and 72 hours after ingestion. A person can die in any 3 of these stages, but the 3rd stage is the most deadly. Death from ethylene glycol poisoning is described as an incredibly slow, miserable, and immensely painful way to die. Julie was in stage 3 at the time of her passing. At the time, antifreeze had a sweet taste to it, and 2 bottles were located in the Jensen's garage. It is believed that Julie had ingested multiple, smaller doses of the chemical, which led to her death. The forensic pathologist looks at these multiple smaller doses and says that this is a key factor in concluding that this is a homicide, not a suicide. In cases where suicide is at play, she says the individual will often consume one large hit, not multiple smaller ones. The multiple smaller doses is more common with homicide, as it's done to mask the flavor using something else such as juice. The day following the finalization of these results, Mark is charged with first-degree intentional homicide, and he's arrested. Much earlier in the investigation, Mark's computer had been retrieved, and forensic data analysts managed to access information from it. In the year of 2023, a data analyst would comment on how this machine was classed as state-of-the-art back in 1998, and taking a look at this machine now was like stumbling across a piece of technological history.
Apparently there was Netflix.
Yep.
Okay.
Got DVDs at the time.
Isn't that when Netflix only gave you the discs, though, in the mail?
Yep. You'd have
For the record, that's when Netflix only had discs.
For the record, that's when Netflix only had the discs, and you had to set your subscription to either monthly, I don't remember exactly, something like that, yeah.
Of all the information recovered, the most notable would be a selection of stored images, emails between Jensen and Labonte, and a large amount of user-deleted internet browsing history from the months leading up to Julie's death. This erased history is extensive, with many searches being repeated over many days, so I'll do my best to compress it down to give you an idea of what the content is. October 16th, 1998, someone searched the terms botulism, poisoning, and they looked into an article about a man who blew up his wife. The user looked up mercury being used as a detonation device, and they also looked for details on how to sabotage a pool. Monday, 19th of October. There are searches for pipe bombs and the Anarchist's Cookbook, a book which contains the instructions for manufacturing homemade explosive devices and more. It appears, though, that the person who was looking into this may not have quite landed on the website that they were looking for.
Apparently they're collecting food and drink recipes.
Yeah, this appears to be a different anarchist cookbook about literal food recipes for anarchists.
November 10. Toxicology Resources, a chemistry, health and safety website where many searches are done within it. December 2nd is the day investigators believe Julie had her first dose of ethylene glycol. At 4:30 a.m., Paxil and paroxetine is searched, and a website for paroxetine is visited. 8:16 a.m., websites for antifreeze poisoning and ethylene glycol poisoning are accessed. 8:17 a.m., oxalic acid, and a website that describes a chemical which was approved for use to treat ethylene glycol poisoning. 8:18 a.m., a website which addresses how patients with toxic alcohol typically present. 8:23 a.m., a website about ethylene glycol. 11:45 a.m., a website which is frequented a lot over the next few hours, has medical information about many different things. Within this site, there is a poisons category which the user does visit. They select the letter E, then they access the ethylene glycol's poisoning page. At 9:34 p.m. that night, there is a website referencing antifreeze poisoning information. December 3rd. Julie at this point is well into stage 2 of ethylene glycol poisoning, possibly even stage 3. 12:46 a.m. There's a poisoning website accessed. 1 a.m. A series of websites about symptoms, unconsciousness, disorientation and so forth. 1:03 a.m. More Yahoo searches for ethylene glycol poisoning. At 1:12 a.m. the user looks up a page about a bounding pulse, cardiogenic shock, and a weak or absent pulse. 9:40 a.m. Another Yahoo search for ethylene glycol poisoning. And it is important to note that after each instance of internet usage, the user deletes the history, but after this last one at 9:40 a.m., the internet history is actually deleted twice in a row within a minute of use, and with no internet searches between the deletions. Although experts are able to pinpoint exact time and dates for this internet history, what they can't do is prove who was the person doing these searches, especially since the computer didn't have a password lock or separate users. To assist with figuring this out, they are able to see that all of the internet activity occurred in a pattern where Mark Jensen was at home, either very early in the mornings, late at nights, and on weekends. and never when he's not around. They're also able to see that sensitive information related to his workplace's intranet had been accessed at a time whilst these internet searches were taking place. To get onto this intranet, it requires a user ID and login password. Furthermore, people who worked with Mark, people that considered him a friend, would also tell detectives about his odd internet searches from his work computer.
He frequently was on the computer searching for what he told me were drug interactions. He was trying to figure out why her behavior, her demeanor, had changed so much and why her health was deteriorating.
The evidence is piling up against Mark, but what would become one of the most damning pieces which the investigation unearthed was a statement made by his former colleague, Ed Klug. In 2007, Ed would be contacted by the DA's office to ask if he knows anything of value, and what he tells them is of utmost interest. Back in early November of 1998, Mark and Ed, along with many other work colleagues, would attend a conference out of town. After this event, they would all go for dinner and drinks, and as the night progressed, one by one people would go back to their hotel rooms, until all that were left at the bar was Ed and Mark. Their topic of conversation for most of the night seemed to have been an airing of grievances that they had regarding their wives. Yet when the crowd dwindled to only those two, Ed would say that the conversation took a very unexpected turn.
He was talking about the strangest things. I mean, I couldn't believe that somebody would talk about killing their wife. You know, it was kind of out of the blue.
Can you tell us, to the best of your recollection, what Mark Jensen said to you?
Mark was talking about how to get rid of the problem, basically. The websites that you could go to search how to kill your wife. And it was just like the craziest thing that I ever heard, that, an educated person would say something like that. And then he was talking about poisons, and he was telling me that you could get items that would be non-detectable in a normal autopsy. He was looking at ways that, he would put somebody to sleep, and put something in. He said you could put it in drinks, have them drink it. He said like ethylene glycol, and I didn't know what ethylene glycol was. And then it's antifreeze.
At some point, do you leave the conversation?
Yeah, because it was getting late, and I always like to check in with my wife, because she would be up. She's worried about me, and so I would go. I went back to the room and called her, called Joanne.
He said that Mr. Jensen had said that there were websites that you can go on how to kill your wife.
Did he sound like he was intoxicated to you?
He was clear.
His words weren't slurred?
No, there was no slurring of words.
And so when your husband told you this, gave you this information, do you remember what your response or what your reaction was to that?
Mr. Klug wanted to go back to the conversation. I told him that he was stupid to do so.
And did he listen to you, or did he go back to the conversation?
Being a man, I don't listen to wives.
And what did you do?
I went back down there. It was the same continued conversation about Mark wanting to get rid of his wife. All the effects of what the chemicals could do to your body to crystallize you from the inside out and not be detectable. He kept talking about that.
At some point, did you return to your hotel room for the night?
Yes, at 4:01.
Did you see Mr. Klug then the next morning?
I was actually shaving in my room, and there was a knock on the door. And he was at the door. And I noticed he was kind of raggy. His tie was off center, and it didn't look like he was ready for the meeting in the morning, which we had at like a breakfast and then a meeting. And I said, "What have you been doing?" He says, "Well, I've been up all night." I says, "Really?" He says, "Yeah, me and Mark were up planning how to kill our wives." And then he laughed, and I laughed, and I thought it was a joke.
Okay.
I thought it was just a joke, because
he had a history of talking that way. So I kind of blew it off. I didn't think much of it.
The Monday morning after the conference, I told basically Stacy, and I told everybody in the office what had happened because it was such a weird conversation.
They had had a conversation about, and the wording might not be exact, but doing away with spouses.
Ed told me that Mark said he was going to kill her.
I think it was along the lines of Ed said, you know how I joke around how I can't stand Joanne, his wife at the time, and I wish she was dead or something like that. And he's like, you know how people joke around about that? And I said, yeah. And he said, but what Mark told him made him feel like he really wanted his wife dead.
August of 2007. After years of legal battles, Mark's trial date draws near. He is in Kenosha County Jail, and it's at this time that a man by the name of Aaron Dillard befriends him. Aaron Dillard is an experienced and very skilled con man, with crimes spanning both the United States and Lithuania. He has a list of people who he scammed out of money that would take me a very long time to read through, especially if we go through all of the details. Seeing as these two became buddies, Mark would talk to Dillard about this case, and over the course of 3 days, would become comfortable enough to tell him quite a lot. Dillard would say that Mark is mainly worried about Ed Klug's testimony, and he says a number of times that Klug is full of shit. Mark wants an opinion on how damaging, troublesome Klug's testimony is going to be for him, so he provides Aaron with the transcript of Ed Klug's testimony from a previous hearing, and he asks for the career criminal's professional assessment of the situation.
Well, I told him that you're pretty much fucked. And because of the words that were in there, he told Klug all this, and Klug was making phone calls to his secretaries or his wife. And I said, if they corroborate that story, I said, you're fucked.
Was there any information you conveyed to him that should reasonably cause him to think that you were a good person to talk to about this?
Well, I mean, we talked about my Lithuanian stuff, and we talked about a lot of things, so I guess he was just talkative.
He was sharing his information with him. He'll break out with his paperwork and show him a couple other individuals. They just came in like weekend warriors. They're there for the weekend and they go home. And he was showing them his information with him, his paperwork and everything with him.
You noticed this because the whole time he was talking to people, you were thinking, what a fool, right?
Yeah, I was thinking worse than that though, but yes. Yes.
You thought it very foolish to share what he had with people, right?
Yes.
You had not at that point thought that maybe there was something you could use in this case?
Not in the beginning, no.
As Aaron learns more and more about Mark's case, he becomes quite curious as to whether Mark had actually poisoned his wife or not. And when conversation centers around the story that she poisoned herself, Aaron always plays devil's advocate.
Well, I questioned him, well, then how'd she get the antifreeze in her system? And then that. And he says, well, I don't, he gave him this, what am I supposed to do? Hold her mouth open and pour it down her throat or stick a tube down her throat? He was saying stuff like that and then trying to discredit everything about, he was proclaiming his innocence. She was self-medicating, that's what his saying she killed herself, that kind of thing at that time.
So how would you respond to that?
I would just say, well, I don't know, because I would talk about the Klug testimony and say, well, why would he come up with that one?
And how would he respond to that?
Well, basically, it was that he's an attention seeker, and that never happened.
Do you have an opinion as to Mr. Klug's character for truthfulness?
There's been instances, what I've had with him in business where he hasn't been totally truthful to me. And I guess there's things that he's done I wouldn't do, put it that way.
Were you aware of what his reputation within the office was as to his honesty?
Yes, you couldn't believe a word he said.
And would you characterize Mr. Klug as an attention seeker?
Yes.
Through their conversations, Aaron continues to apply pressure, and eventually he spots a moment of opportunity. The two had been discussing Mark's predicament when Dillard notices Jensen become emotional as he talks about his sons. Aaron says that he used this moment where Mark appeared vulnerable to see if he could get the man to talk. He applies more pressure than he had before and accuses Mark once again of committing the murder. This time, it works, and Aaron says that Mark confessed to everything.
He said that she got loopy because she took Benadryl, Paxil, and then I think it was the Librium at that time. And that she got real loopy and this and that, and she wanted to lay down. She just was real tired, so he gave her juice to drink, and that was when he told me at that point it was mixed with the antifreeze. That's the point where a lot of things changed.
What do you mean?
Well, at that point I decided it was a way out.
You're hearing about a confession to a murder.
Yeah.
And you thought you might use that.
Yes.
So you started paying careful attention?
Yes, that's when I started paying a little bit more attention to everything.
Aaron Dillard goes into detail regarding what occurred in the days following that first dose of antifreeze. He explains that after Julie had begun to feel the effects of the antifreeze, she became quite concerned, but he calmed her by saying that it's the Paxil which is causing her loss of inhibitions. He even prints out information related to the Paxil side effects and shows it to Julie. This lines up with the internet browsing history that shows that someone did access a website for Paxil side effects at 4 in the morning on December 2nd. Julie accepts that the medication is making her feel loopy, and by Dillard's report of what Mark said, she doesn't suspect that she had been poisoned. On the morning of her death, he says that Mark tells him about how he administered another dose of antifreeze before taking the children to school. He tells Dillard that when he got back to the house around midday, after dropping the children off, he expected her to be dead, but she was not.
He came home, and that's the point when he came home and she was breathing better. And he said that he got really nervous. He got scared.
Did he tell you why?
Well, she was breathing better, and he didn't think she was going to die.
And why would that scare him?
Because the kids wanted to take her to the hospital, and if she wasn't better by the time he got home, that's where they were going to go.
Did he tell you how he responded to this?
As far as her breathing better.
What did he do when he came home and found that she was breathing better?
And that's the point when he rolled her over and sat on her back and pushed on her neck into the pillow.
Pushed what into the pillow?
Her face and neck.
And did he tell you what happened?
Said she died.
Dillard is moved to another location the next morning at 6 a.m. and doesn't have any more contact with Mark Jensen from this point on. He manages to speak with DA Robert Jambois and tells him what he had discussed with Mark. Because of this new information regarding suffocation that lines up with the state's suspicions, a deal is offered in exchange for his testimony. After his brief meeting with Aaron Dillard, a month later, in September of 2007, Mark Jensen would become acquainted with another person, a man named
David Thompson, D-A-V-I-D-T-H-O-M-P-S-O-N.
All right, who's doing the direct?
I am.
Go ahead, Mr. Jeffers.
Good morning, Mr. Thompson.
Morning.
Do you recall there was a time that you were locked up in the county jail with a guy by the name of Mark Jensen?
Yes.
And what were you doing in the county jail?
I was in the county jail at that time for a bank robbery.
No, there's kind of a hierarchy in a prison and a jail, isn't there, among the inmates?
Yeah, to some degree, yes.
And where do bank robbers fit in that hierarchy?
That's a good question. I would guess somewhere in the middle, I would assume.
So, I mean, if you're going to be in for a kind of a crime, well, bank robbery is better than, say, retail theft, right?
Absolutely.
But where does murder fit in the hierarchy of things?
Murder puts you right at the top.
So, Mr. Jensen was kind of higher than you in the hierarchy of things because he was in for murder at the time.
Total celebrity. When I first met Mark, he was kind of standoffish, I guess because according to what was going on with his case at the time. But after about 2 or 3 days, I started talking to him, and he, finally warmed up to me.
And the bigger guy, I believe it was Thompson, kept pretty much bullying Jensen, asking to make a bunch of calls for him, 3-way phone calls.
He made phone calls for me. I made phone calls for him.
So he made phone calls for you. How did you get him to make phone calls for you?
Well, I asked him the first couple of times that I asked him, he wouldn't do it. Then the third time, he relented and made a call for me.
So what happened between the first, second, and third time that caused him to change his mind?
We had a little altercation.
We have little totes in your room to put your belongings. He threw his in Jensen's room and told him fill it up with canteen or he's going to put some blood in his mouth. Jensen filled it up and gave it to him.
And what kind of stuff did he fill up the bin with?
From what I see, it was just like chips and candy and stuff like that. And Thompson passed it around to some of his guys in here.
Afterwards, I apologized to him about it, and from therefore, we just became, kind of cool. Yeah, it's like he opened up more. We became kind of closer. We would talk every day, drink coffee together every morning, read the newspaper and talk in the corner and, just off to ourselves. Mr. Klug was going to testify against him, and he asked me, he said, well, I don't really want him to come to court, and he approached me with the idea like, man, what could I do to keep him from coming to court? And it kind of, piqued my interest because I wanted to see, was he really serious about this or was he just blowing off some hot air? At that point, I said, well, let me really see how far he's willing to go with this. So I asked him, I said, well, probably can make that happen for you for the right price. I said, well, man, $1,000, just to see what he would say, see what he was, if he would bite that, if he was really serious.
So when you said $1,000, what did he say?
He said, that's kind of low, but I can do that.
David Thompson says that he thought Mark was going to be an easy target to scam some money out of. So he calls his girlfriend Kim from the jail and gives her next to no details about the plan. In fact, all she is told is that a man named Mark will be calling her at some point. And when he does, she needs to say the words, "Everything is as planned." Kim, although bewildered by this, agrees to what has been asked of her.
These phone calls from the jail, were you aware that they were subject to monitoring and recording?
I was aware of it, but, for what I was in there charged with, I didn't think that they would still be listening for me to be talking about this Mark and stuff,
Yeah,
Thought they were just concerned about the bank robberies.
Yeah. But you learned later that we were listening.
I know better now, yeah.
You know better now. Do you recall these calls being preceded by a recorded message saying this phone call is subject to monitoring and recording?
When you have greed on your mind, you overlook those things.
Okay.
Mark Jensen also places some phone calls of his own, the first being to his parents.
Well, I got an offer of help today in a different way, which was interesting. What? You got an offer of help today in a different way, which was interesting.
Yeah, how's that?
I'll tell you guys about that later.
Okay.
When he gets off the phone with his parents, he places 2 more calls to his wife at the time, Kelly Jensen, formerly Kelly Labonte.
Oh. Well, the guy today was offering to go grab somebody and sit on him.
Okay.
Oh. Just the way the kids used to be able to do it,
Yeah.
When they would go find Doug, grab him, pick him up, carry him somewhere, sit on him.
Yep.
Oh, God. But that would be we got time to figure it out and have some fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big question is
Yep.
where do we want to go and what do we want it to be? And where to from here? Draw a line, put all this behind us and move on. But I want our life back,
Yep.
All of it, every part of it, let's see, money-wise, how is everything?
Fine, I guess. I just have to remember to pay the bills.
Bills?
Shit. Forgot to pay one of my credit cards.
Oh, really?
Got socked with the late fee and the interest charge. I was like, son of a bitch.
Okay.
But, it's taken care of. But, no,
Okay.
other than that, we're fine.
Sounds
That's why I have so many things set up on auto pay. Because I just don't need the hassle.
Okay. Oh, let's see. There was something. Okay. Well, that's good. There was something I think I want to have my folks take care of.
Mm-hmm.
And might have you give them some money. Just a little bit. And I'll explain that to you.
Okay.
Okay? Not right now.
Okay.
Okay? We'll see if I'll figure it out. Okay. Other than that, I don't know anything more about that at this point, so.
Does it have to do with something in there?
What's that?
Does it have to do with something in there?
Oh, no. No. Yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
All right.
Okay. And that's all.
How much?
Oh. It'd be like 500.
Okay.
Maybe twice. And that would be it. and I'm not sure if I want to do that or not, but,
Okay.
and I know I'm not giving you any answer at all.
No, well, but I understand.
Okay.
You have 1 minute left.
You're going to get cut off again.
All right.
Okay, well, don't worry about that. It's just because I want to give you a heads up or something like that with that. Okay. Love you. Everything else good? Good. Everything's fine. Let's see, what else is going on here?
After asking Kelly to transfer his parents $500 twice, he then calls his mother again to ask her to give this money to Kim, David Thompson's partner. On this phone call, he alludes to his mother the potential plan, and she agrees to help, even though she doesn't really understand what the money is for. You will notice on this phone call the name Bockel being mentioned a few times. It is unconfirmed, but Bockel is believed to be Mark Jensen's father, Dan.
Sounds good, and yeah, we'll go from there. So,
all right.
We'll talk to you tomorrow. But that could be fun.
Yeah.
Fun and interesting. This is something that Baca would like.
Oh, okay. Then he will talk to her.
Oh, it doesn't have to. I mean, it could be. You guys talk, and
This
everything's
is
fine.
a Baco kind of thought process.
No, it could be. Could be kind of fun. So I don't know. What you gonna do? Sometimes it's like two little kids when they're. Well, it's like David used to do to Doug. When Doug was misbehaving, David would just go grab him, pick him up, and go sit on him for a bit. So, but yeah, just Baco. Those are thought processes and everything. So.
Oh well,
Yep. What you gonna do?
Deal with it, because sometimes that thought process is really cool.
Right, exactly. Yep. Sometimes you gotta get. Yeah. Sometimes a 12-year-old has the best answers. Yeah. Talk to Kel. She's got that stuff for you. I'll talk to her, but we gotta see if we can get this part done. Okay.
Okay.
And I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.
All right.
Okay. Love you.
See you on Sunday.
Okay, that's right. Yep. See you Sunday.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Hey,
Hey there.
it's almost 9. What are you doing?
Oh, I know. I just wanted to get back to you on that. I got $20 left. So, I spent a lot on pads and pens and stuff like that last week.
Okay.
Okay. And I got a bunch of stuff ripped off.
I can't afford $100 a week, pal. So you need to budget a little better.
I understand.
Okay.
Okay. I'm working on it.
All right.
So, it's just, to get a bar of soap and a couple soap, shampoo, stuff like that. Generally, usually it's about $50. I spent more than that, though, this last time. It was like 80 of that 100. And then they grabbed some stuff for that medical stuff, too. So. Okay. So.
All right.
Sorry. I understand. But, yeah, stuff's not real cheap. And
No, it's fine. It's just, we've put, what?
I know. I realize that. It gets over the top.
$800 in phone calls.
Right. The cost of being here, it's amazing, and it sucks.
It's $100 every 2 weeks, and now we're going to $100 every week.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I understand.
And now you want another $1,000 for something I don't know anything about, but your parents do, and we're all talking on the same phone, so I'm not really sure about that one, but
Right.
okay.
Right.
And they're certainly never going to tell me the truth, so.
Right. Well, I don't even know about that one, sweetie. I just don't want you to, I just don't want to get you.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
That's okay.
The plan is set into motion. Kelly is to transfer Mark's parents $1,000, to which Mark's mother would deliver $500 to Kim now, and then $500 again later if Ed was to miss the trial. Mark's mother contacts Kim in regards to this, and everyone seems incredibly confused. Kelly is transferring $1,000 to Mark's parents for reasons she is not aware. Mark's mother is giving a woman this money whom she has never met before and doesn't know why. And Kim is receiving the money and has no idea what it's for. But before the plan can really get off the ground, David Thompson is confronted with the knowledge that his calls were being monitored.
I wanted to trick Mark out of the money. That was the initial plan. Once everything got recorded on the telephone, my lawyer told me that that they recorded all the phone calls, and he told me to come forth and be truthful before I end up getting a different charge. And that's when I came forth and told everything that happened as it did. I wasn't gaining anything from telling the truth other than preventing myself from getting another charge.
Almost 10 years after Julie's death, Mark Jensen is scheduled to go to trial in January of 2008. The detailed history of this case is incredibly extensive, and for the years leading up to this trial, heated legal battles ensued. Originally, a judge would rule Julie Jensen's letter from the grave as inadmissible evidence, but prosecutor Bob Jambois would pursue the task of getting her words into the trial with a conviction like no other. In 2007, he is successful, and the letter is allowed to be shown to the jury, along with many statements made by Julie before she died. As a bit of background, the letter was originally not allowed in as it violated Mark's right to cross-examine witnesses who testify against him. Seeing as Julie was unable to be cross-examined, the letter was not admissible. Bob Jambois argued, though, that he had enough evidence to satisfy the court that Mark Jensen was the one who ended Julie's life. This meant that the defendant waived his right to cross-examine the witness, as he caused her absence.
I understand the need to be able to cross-examine witnesses against you, but I also understand the need to ensure that perpetrators who extinguish the voices of victims do not profit from that. So I think that this is a very important case, and I expect someday this case is going to be argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, and when that happens, I want to be there.
Mark goes to trial, and the result sees him convicted of the murder of his wife, sentenced to life without parole. Mark would appeal this, and in 2013, the Supreme Court overturns his conviction, stating that a mistake had been made, and indeed, the admission of the letter violated his Sixth Amendment right. Mark is then released from prison, and legal battles go back and forth for years, when in September 2017, his conviction is reinstated, for it to be once more reversed in 2020. This all comes to a head with another trial being set for January of 2023. In terms of evidence presented and witnesses testifying, this second trial would play out very similar to the first, with many familiar faces taking to the stand to tell their stories once more. Witnesses who were no longer able to attend this trial for various reasons would have their recorded testimony from 2007 played for the jury, and even Bob Jambois returned to lead the charge of the state's argument. Notable differences would be that Julie Jensen's letter and her voicemails to Officer Ron Cosman stating that she thinks her husband is going to kill her are not allowed in. The state presents a compelling case. Their medical experts believe that this is absolutely a homicide, not a suicide, and although Aaron Dillard may not be the most trustworthy witness, his story makes too much sense with their findings. Especially since Aaron claims to have read nothing of the case other than Ed Klug's testimony, so he surely couldn't have known these details without having been directly told them by Mark. Initially, the examiner suspected asphyxia, but couldn't definitively prove it. Yet with Aaron Dillard's testimony of Mark sitting on top of her and pushing her head into the pillow, things started to make sense. The bent nose, the hemorrhaging on the ribs where her arm was underneath, and the lack of struggle due to her being pretty much comatose from all of the drugs and chemicals in her system. Many witnesses are presented to give detailed testimony on their experience with Julie, her family members, friends, neighbors, potential future employers. Everyone had nothing but lovely things to say about her, and none of them noticed any significant change in her mental state or physical appearance in the months before she passed. A common thread running through all of this testimony would be everyone's observations of how great a mother Julie was, fantastic with children in general, and completely dedicated to her boys. Many would say that the idea she killed herself, then attempted to destroy her husband's life by framing him, is beyond laughably ridiculous. She would never put her boys into such a situation. Some of these witnesses would testify about future plans that they had with Julie, Christmas gifts being bought, Thanksgiving plans, and even a discussion a few days before she died with a friend about how to grow plants from some seeds she had obtained. Even Julie's calendar was shown, which had multiple future events written in it for the months following her death. A big point of contention between prosecution and defense in both trials would be Julie's ability to use a computer. This may not seem like something too important, but it is crucial to the case. Seeing as no one is able to prove who used the computer in the Jensen household, what the state would try to prove was that Julie didn't even know how to turn a computer on. Multiple witnesses are presented and testify to this fact. One even quoting Julie's son David, who told her that he had to teach his mother how to turn a computer on. The state says that even if she were to use a computer here and there, her understanding of how they operate would have been bare minimum, and she most definitely wouldn't have had the knowledge to be able to erase internet browsing history. In regards to the year's worth of harassment, the state would present evidence to the jury that shows Mark was indeed the person behind it all. According to Julie's documentation of all the harassment that had occurred, much of it was directed at Mark's workplace, and this was proven to be impossible.
6/19/98. Definitely found Mark's new office phone number, ranted, raved, and swore at the receptionist. Several hang-ups at the office after that. When you worked in that office as the receptionist, did you ever receive a phone call where someone ranted and raved at you?
No.
Did you ever receive a phone call where someone swore at you?
No.
Did you ever, during that time period, receive any harassing phone calls?
No, not at all.
Did you ever receive a bunch of hang-up calls so it became suspicious?
No.
As far as opening mail, the front office would receive the mail, and they would always open every piece. Even if it was marked personal, they'd open it to see what was in it.
Did you ever receive any pornographic images in the mail?
No.
And do you recall whether you opened any mail for Mark Jensen that contained any sexually explicit photographs or images? No.
No such photos were in the mail at Prudential Bach or Robert Baird or at Seifel Nicholas at the office. Is that true?
Opened by the front office, that's correct.
And all of the mail was opened by the front office, isn't that true?
That's the policy.
Investigation into Mark's home computer would show that many of the harassing emails that were sent to him were from the mysterious user known only as Turtle.
Okay, and is this how the user would have seen
Correct.
the email?
Yes, correct.
The subject?
The subject and the content, yes.
In this particular email that was sent, the subject was, quote, "my dick," unquote?
Correct.
And then the only content of the email in terms of typing in it is missing it?
Yes.
With a bunch of question marks?
Correct.
And this particular email, it had, I believe, 8 attachments. Is that correct?
That is true.
And they all have the names Hung One?
Yes.
Were you able to actually see the email address where this was sent from?
Yes.
And so this was sent from the email address of mjensen@execpc.com?
Correct.
And it was sent to the email address of mjensen@execpc.com?
Correct.
This one also indicates that it's from Turtle to Mark Jensen, is that correct?
Correct.
And then the subject for this one is what you want to see?
Yes.
Want to see more, question mark?
Yes.
And then the next is don't believe it's me, question mark?
Yes.
Don't expect me to show my face, but had the forethought to personalize for a couple of pics, enjoy, or as the case may be or is, feel bad. So once again, this is from M. Jensen to M. Jensen.
Yes.
And the names have simply been changed, or at least the initial name was changed to Turtle.
Sorry. Correct.
As the forensic data analyst explains to the jury, some email providers allowed for the user to alter the from address, allowing for the sender to change their name, thus hiding the actual address that sent the mail. Whilst I'm on the topic of these emails, I feel this is as good a time as any to bring up a key element in this case, which I haven't really touched on in this video yet.
Do you remember a time in 90 or 91, shortly after Mark Jensen joined Prudential, back walking into his office and finding something on the desk?
I do.
Tell the jury about that.
It was a smaller 8x10, 8x12 stenographer's notebook. And inside of it, the entire thing was sketches of penises.
Judge, I move to strike as irrelevant.
What's the relevance, Mr. Jambois?
Well, Your Honor, the defendant's preoccupation with penises is going to be central to a good portion of the other evidence in this case. It was the defendant, there's going to be testimony that there were 2,200 penis photos found on Mark Jensen's office computer. And many of these photos were of the sort that were being left around the residence from 91 through 98.
Well, I think it's relevant, and I'm only going to say it once. I think there's so much penis evidence in this case. It's already been directed through the video. There's already been pictures. And let the jury decide whether this evidence has any bearing here. But I think it's an issue that's been presented now by the state, and I will allow it. So let's bring back the jury, and we will.
Do you have an estimate about how many there were? How many different penis?
The notebook seemed to be filled with them.
What I'm going to do is go through here and point out all of the areas where the defendant is taking notes and drawing photos or drawing pictures about penises. Page stamped page 235. There's apparent pictures of vaginas, but then 3 of penis heads. 1 is written 2, T-O-O, mushroom shaped. Then in another location it's written, I'm longer, larger head, greater length, shaped for ease in entry versus blunt. 1 entitled Nice Curve, Me, slender, nicely curved at end versus pointy. Then underneath that, more pointy, more bigger, more straight up and down. Other guys have knob at the end. It's like it gets stuck in your hand or your mouth, parent points. And then 2 more penises at the bottom, 1 with more of a pointy head and 1 with a more rounded head. 4 more pictures of penises. 1 is circled and it has the notation me. Thinner through here, pointing to the middle part of the penis. Then another picture of a penis, and it's designated points, and there's arrows around it. My balls are bigger than Greenman's. Harry, his, always smaller at first. Balls come in all different sizes. Mine are big. Then underneath that, I'm a little bigger dick-wise. It just goes on and on and on and on about penis, a total preoccupation with penises. And
if you thought that was the extent of the evidence the state had regarding this matter, then think again, as evidence related to the penis would be introduced that came in all shapes and sizes.
Mark ever have any conversation with you about spoofing Barry Peterson?
Yes, he did. Barry was single at the time, and apparently had been on a single dating site. And so Mark created a person that he called Warm Irish Eyes. It was supposedly a woman. And he responded to, or started to come on to, Barry Peterson as this woman named Warm Irish Eyes.
So Mark would tell you about this?
Yes, he did. He would have pictures of penises and would inquire to Barry Peterson whether or not he was that big or things of that nature.
Did he begin asking you extremely detailed questions about your prior sexual partners?
Yes.
And did he specifically ask for each of your partners about their penises?
Yes.
And did he ask you to describe their penises in detail?
Yes.
Would that include things like length?
Yes.
Width?
Yes.
And did you examine the early internet activity that was occurring in July on this computer?
I did.
And based on your examination of this early internet activity, did you see access to pornographic sites?
I did.
So there's a search for dick size, a website that's accessed erect guys, a website that's accessed Blowjob Central. There is a folder that's called D average, D large, D small, containing images.
Correct.
And then there's various folders labeled oral. And do all of these contain images?
They do.
When you looked at the images in D average, what were they?
Penises.
And also D large?
Same thing. Male genitalia.
And then D small?
Again, penises.
Did you see that there was various things that were apparently deleted or put in the recycle bin?
Yes.
Free pics of big cocks, is that the same thing?
That is an internet file, so like a link to an internet file.
And so there was a folder on the internet that was, this is kind of hard to see, but that was labeled smut.
Yes.
And then it had various seemingly pornographic websites connected to that.
That is correct.
By presenting the argument that Mark was the one behind the harassment, the state would say that this leads one to suspect that he is a sadistic, narcissistic sociopath, one that took pleasure in tormenting his wife over and over for years on end. It was relentless. The harassment would follow them wherever they went.
12/19/95, photos left in truck at Ruther during David's Christmas program. That's quite a stalker there. Finding the truck at Ruther during a Christmas program. That's amazing. That stalker is one step ahead.
They would say that while Julie was trying to live a normal life, raise her children, indulge in hobbies and interests such as gardening, book clubs and baking, Mark's only hobby was tormenting his wife, keeping her in a constant state of visceral guilt and shame. He put so much energy into it each and every day. At every turn where Julie would try to work on their relationship or live a normal life, they say that Mark was right there, hiding in the shadows, and reminding her that she is a horrible person. The state says that Mark Jensen hated his wife with such intensity that he didn't want to divorce her. He wanted to punish her for the rest of her life. And this cruel harassment only stopped when he had begun his affair, something which gave him a new focus. Yet what came with his new girlfriend was a pressure that turned him murderous. Evidence was presented via emails back and forth, showing that Kelly wanted an answer about whether he was going to leave his wife or not, with her calling him evasive when he wouldn't answer her questions directly. There's even a point in their email exchanges where we actually see Kelly break off the romantic relationship with Mark. She states she wants to try make things work with her current husband. The state would use this all to say that although Kelly had no part to play in the murder plot, this pressure had Mark try to find an easy solution to his problem. A solution which came in the form of researching poisons that wouldn't be detected at autopsy. This option would eliminate the need to have custody battles or to ever pay child support. There would be no divorce proceedings, no splitting of assets, and he would even receive a large sum payout of life insurance for Julie. Included in the state's evidence is a statement made by Laura Costa, Mark's sister. Julie had told two neighbors that when she informed Laura that she thinks her brother is plotting to kill her, Laura's response was, "I lived with him for 18 years. You have no idea what he's capable of." These words, Bob Jamboys would argue, show that not only Laura knew her brother is dangerous, but seeing as Laura would deny ever saying anything like this, it proves that the Jensen family are liars. To support this, the detective claims that the day following Julie's death, Laura called him in tears, telling him that she thinks her brother may have killed his wife. Yet again, Laura denies this ever happening. It's her word against his. Robert Jamboys would say that this is completely in character for Laura, as she had once before provided a false alibi for her father, Dan, when he was at trial for burglary. Dan was found guilty, seeing as there were two eyewitnesses that put him at the scene, and the Jensen family, who all testified for his alibi, were proven to be liars. And finally, a number of people are brought to the stand to tell the jury about their observations of Mark's strange behavior in the moments, days, and weeks after Julie had died.
I was standing on the end of Carrie Ashley's driveway, facing the house, and Mark was standing there. And Mark and I made eye contact. And Mark walked across the street to me, and I just looked at him. I said, "My God, Mark, what happened?" And he looks at me, and he had a cigarette in his hand, and he took a drag of his cigarette, put his head back. She's gone. What was weird is I'm literally devastated. And he talked like it was just a conversation, just no feeling, no emotion, just kind of matter of fact.
I I saw Mark on December 4th. I saw him outside.
What time of day was this?
It was afternoon. I saw him on his driveway by the garage, and I saw his dad, and they gave each other a high five, and they were happy, they were smiling, and that was very strange, because I thought, your wife just died yesterday, why are you so happy?
And Mark was walking down the driveway, and his father was approaching him, and they give each other a high five. It was, to us, was like, it's like, you happy? What are you celebrating?
He brought up the issue of whether or not it would be appropriate for Kelly to be at the wake.
So this was within a matter of days of Julie's death?
That's correct.
And he was asking you about whether his girlfriend should come to his wife's wake and funeral?
That's correct.
It was an open casket, and I was in line, I want to say at least 20 minutes, and because of Mark's demeanor the day she died, I was watching him because I thought, again, his demeanor when she died was indifferent, so I was watching him to see how he was behaving, and he was literally standing 5 feet from her casket, laughing and joking with a group of men the entire time. And again, I thought, in my mind, that's extremely odd. He just lost his wife, the mother of his children, and he's acting like he's at a cocktail party.
At the wake, did you see Mark Jensen?
Yes, I did. We were waiting in line at the wake, just waiting to speak with the family, and I guess I would just say that, as he was greeting the guests, he just did not seem upset, more laughing and carrying on with the people he was talking with.
Was the Monday following Mrs. Jensen's funeral garbage day in your neighborhood?
Yes.
And do you recall observing anything outside of the Jensen home the Monday?
Yes, there was a large pile of Julie's clothes and things.
And did you personally observe this?
Yes.
I remember seeing it was a lot of garbage, more than usual, and a lot of stuff inside black garbage bags, but there also was loose things that I could tell there were Julie's personal things.
There was, whether they were sweaters or dresses or what, but they were definitely women's clothes out in the garbage.
Shortly thereabouts, he asked if what my thoughts were if Julie were to move into his home.
Julie or Kelly?
Pardon me, Kelly.
So this was within a matter of days of Julie's death?
That's correct.
Did you marry the defendant?
Yes.
When did you marry him?
2004.
Now, you're not still married to the defendant, correct?
I am not.
The defense, on the other hand, would have an entirely different take on the situation. They would say that this is all a setup, that Julie was an incredibly mentally unstable person, one with a personal history of major depressive disorder and family history of mental illness and suicide. To support this, when Julie's brother Patrick was 17 years old, he would attempt to commit suicide following his father revoking his privilege to drive the family car. They say that Julie was battling with her mental health for years leading up to her death, and didn't want to show anyone how severe it was, because of fears that people would think she's ending up like her mother, and negative stigma that surrounds mental illness. They say that the only one who saw how bad she was her husband, a man who would bear the brunt of her outbursts and poor behavior. They acknowledge that possibly Mark was not the best equipped to help her, but he did do his best. He provided for the family, and worked long hours because his wife refused to work. They say he's a man who loved his family deeply. The defense says that when Julie caught wind of Mark's affair in 1998, it pushed her over the edge. She didn't know how to handle the situation and was losing everything she cared about: her husband, her children, an image of mental stability in the eyes of those around her. And in the face of all of this, she devised a plan to end her own life whilst punishing Mark in the process. To assist with this argument, the defense would present multiple expert witnesses. One we've seen before, Paul DeFazio, would say that despite what Julie's brothers claim, she had a very unhappy childhood according to her, and that her feelings of worthlessness were fueled by insecurity and depression, and this was all present during their sessions. Other experts hadn't actually had any personal interactions with Julie, but they did review many documents that pertain to her case.
There is nothing in looking at an autopsy in a ethylene glycol poisoning case that is going to tell you whether it is a suicide or a homicide or an accident by virtue of the fact that this is a liquid. And so just by staying strict to the science and strict to the toxicology, you cannot determine just by the science what the manner of death is. And so I would say that the manner of death is undetermined.
Can you determine just from the science whether Ms. Jensen had more than one dose of ethylene glycol?
No.
If you look at all of the ribs, they're all dark on that side compared to the ribs on the other side. So that to me fits with, well, yeah, that's postmortem lividity. That's where the blood settled. Maybe that's what he's referring to as hemorrhage, and where her arm is would sort of be in that area. So to me, it just seems like, well, there could be extra congestion on either side of her arm because of the pressure. I mean, it just, to me, sort of corresponds with, well, yeah, that's the position she was found, so that fits. But it doesn't really tell me anything about how that happened, because it also could have been that she bumped into something earlier. But I think even more, if you're pushing a face into a pillow and the person is resisting, you would see, maybe abrasions or scrapes, something from the nose rubbing. Furthermore, if someone has a full stomach and they're lying face down and someone, adult-sized person, climbs on their back, I would expect, especially if they're, a little sedated from whatever medications and ethylene glycol, that they would regurgitate, that food would be forced out of their stomach, and they might inhale it, or it for sure would be on the bedding. And again, in this case, there was no evidence of fluid or stomach contents on the bedding or in the lungs.
Suicide can be shameful. There's still a great deal, we've come a long way since 1998, but there is still a great deal of stigma attached to mental health issues and feeling like you want to hurt yourself. And I think that Ms. Jensen actually experienced this rather acutely. She had told people throughout the years that her mother was ill, and she was very concerned about being labeled, quote unquote, crazy like her mother. She did not want to lose her children over the possibility. She did not want to lose her children, which may have occurred in her mind. Again, this is her perception, that she would be hospitalized and labeled as crazy.
And do you have an opinion held to a reasonable degree of medical certainty on what Ms. Jensen's diagnosis is?
Yes, it is my opinion, with a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that at the time of her death on December 3rd, 1998, she was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, recurrent, because there is evidence to suggest that she had had previous depressive episodes.
Defense would present Mark's sister, Laura Costa, who would say that Julie was absolutely capable of using the computer, often using it to search for children's activities and things related to Disney online. She says that in the months following Julie's death, she noticed her brother was incredibly overwhelmed with grief and with the extra responsibilities of taking care of the family household all on his own, but he always did his best. She testifies that Mark's demeanor at the wake and funeral indicated that he was clearly grieving. She saw him in tears multiple times after his wife had passed, and although he may not have been breaking down at every turn, she knew how upset he was. During Laura's testimony, she would tell the jury what she observed of Julie's unraveling mental state.
She had asked me to look at a photo of a planner with a list on it and a plastic, like pretty large syringe, not a needled syringe, but like a plastic one that you would use to flush something out with, or dog medication, something like that. All she did was show it to me and ask me what I thought. I was not sure what she was looking for, and I told her it didn't seem that odd to me. But what I noted was her unsureness and the oddness of the question.
Now, did you ever have a conversation with Julie where she said that she thought Mark might be trying to kill her?
Yes, that was after that. We were at her house outside in the front with the kids playing. And she did mention that she thought that Mark might be trying to kill her. And she asked me if I saw it. And I looked at her because I was stunned. And she looked back at me and she said, "You don't see it." I said, "I don't." She wasn't scared. It was a conversation while our kids were playing around us. It was the emotional aspect of that conversation was extraordinarily flat for the topic of conversation.
When I see somebody who is flat, I'm concerned about two things. The first would be depression, to the extent where they can't feel anything. The second would be a different serious diagnosis, psychosis. It's actually one of the things that can precipitate a flat affect or lack of emotional expression.
You're aware that Ms. Jensen made some statements that she was in fear of her husband. How did that play into your analysis?
I certainly took that into account. She did report that to her neighbors. But again, given that her perception was distorted in terms of her support and her losses, I had concern that perhaps she wasn't perceiving this correctly as well. So there's some historical evidence as well as contemporary evidence to December 1st that she had some difficulties with perceiving reality around her. While she stated that she was fearful of her husband, she was a woman of means. She had access to the family's finances. She was a very bright woman and was well aware of the resources available to her, and she chose not to pursue any of these resources. There are a couple of very specific examples of that. Namely, the neighbor, Mr. Voigt, offered her both money and a place to stay after she shared with him that she was fearful. She did not take him up on that. And the teacher, Ms. DeFazio, offered to help connect her with a woman's shelter where she could go to be out of danger related to her husband. And again, she chose not to pursue this.
Now, I understand you saw Julie at karate the Monday before she passed away. Is that correct?
I did. She was sad. For sure, she was sad. She told me that she was going to the doctor. She was going to the doctor and that she was going to be treated for depression. She told me she wasn't going to be at karate the next time and that Mark would bring David. And she said she wouldn't be seeing me for a few days because she had been treated for depression before and been put on medication, and it always made her feel terrible. So she said she wouldn't be around for a little bit.
Ms. Jensen set up a window for herself in which she would be capable of ending her life. And by that, I can give you some very specific examples. She shared with her best friend and sister-in-law preemptively, even prior to seeing her medical provider, that she would be started on medication, that she would experience side effects to this medication, and therefore not to worry if she didn't come with her son to karate practice. That would be on December 2nd. On December 2nd, she also called her neighbors and told them if they didn't see her outside, they were not to worry because she was okay. And then she also wrote a note to the teacher, Ms. DeFazio, on that day that she would not be in because she was not well. So she had almost created a space for herself in which people who would be concerned about her not presenting to a variety of activities had been given notice as to where she was.
We've already talked about statements Julie Jensen made indicating that she is not suicidal. Do those statements, again, does that change your opinion at all?
No, not at all.
Can an educated person commit suicide?
Yes. As we know, anyone can commit suicide. It's always a tragic event and a terrible loss, but it affects everyone.
And do devoted mothers commit suicide?
Yes. People with children commit suicide. People with parents commit suicide. People with brothers and sisters commit suicide.
Do people you would describe as kind and loving commit suicide?
Yes, amazing people commit suicide every day. It's a national problem, and since this time, there has been a national hotline that's been instituted to assist people with suicidal thoughts.
As one might expect, the defense would attack the credibility of witnesses such as David Thompson, Aaron Dillard, and Ed Klug. Ed is painted as an attention seeker and a liar, one who had read newspaper reports about the case and didn't come forward to law enforcement with his story for many years after it happened. They would even go into some details about how Ed had organized the watch party for the trial so that he and his friends could get together and watch his testimony on television as he went up against the big bad wife poisoner. Aaron Dillard and David Thompson were described as liars, thieves, bullies and conmen, spineless people who would do and say anything to save their own skin. Aaron Dillard's prior convictions were fleshed out in excruciating detail, taking up easily over an hour dedicated to that alone. They believe that Aaron had heard about Mark Jensen's case because it was all over the news, and he wormed his way into Mark's life. He read his documents, which did contain the police interview transcript, and he then used the detective's own theory of suffocation to construct this alleged confession. Perry Tarika has the finger pointed at him to be the more likely candidate as the source of all this harassment. A scorned lover who was obsessed with Julie. Julie is argued to have been an independent, strong, and intelligent person, one that never depended on Mark, and one that was most definitely not under his control or a victim of manipulation on his part. They say she's the one who used the checkbook to control the family finances, and she even used an application on the computer called Quicken to do all their budgeting. They bring attention to a time when Julie was at lunch with Laura. Julie was ecstatic to tell her friend about this new man she had met, Perry, someone that made her so happy she had already begun thinking about plans to marry him. And they say that Julie was not thinking clearly at all. She was not paying any thought to how this affair or marriage might affect her children or Mark. A pastor was brought to the stand, a man who had attended the wake, and he would tell the jury that he saw no odd behavior from Mark at all. All he saw was a grieving husband. And another witness who was called to the stand was Mark and Julie's son, David Jensen, who was 8 years old at the time his mother passed away. During his testimony, he recalls his father being a great dad, one who had made plans to give their mother a present for Christmas of 1998, a fishing rod that he worked on together with his dad and his brother. He tells the jury about his experience of watching his mother use the computer on some evenings, and for a large part of his time on the stand, he would talk about what he could remember from the day his mother died.
Did you see your mom that morning?
Yes, we went to go say goodbye to her before we left for school.
And where was she?
She was in bed.
And was she still sick?
Yes, her breathing was raspy that morning, but she still, gave us a hug, told us she loved us, and before we left.
Prior to leaving the house, did you have any conversation with your dad about how your mom was doing?
Yes, we talked about how we were going to come straight home after school. He was going to pick me up We'll pick both of us up. And if she wasn't feeling better, we were going to take her straight to the doctor.
There was a day at school that David informed me about his mother's health. He told me that his mother is sick and that his dad will not take her to the hospital.
Yeah, we got home, and yeah, we wanted to go see her, obviously, but he told us to wait in the living room so he could go check if she was asleep, or didn't want two kids just jumping on her.
And did you stay in the living room then?
Yes, we did.
And I think you
Douglas and I did.
And at some point, your dad came back out of the bedroom.
Yes.
And it was at that point that you saw him crying?
Yes.
David, when you saw your dad coming down that hallway, sobbing or crying, had you ever seen him that way before?
That was the first time I'd seen him cry.
After your dad came down the hallway, what did he say to you?
He told us to stay on the couch and asked me to put on a movie for Doug.
And did you do that?
Yes. He sat us down on his lap and told us she'd passed. I'd kind of already knew at that point, and I don't remember what specifically he said to me. I was kind of just numb, and he may as well have been talking to the wall. I was kind of just in a daze.
With both sides resting their case, the jury would deliberate for a day before reaching a verdict.
State of Wisconsin versus Mark D. Jensen, 2002 CF 314 verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Mark D. Jensen, guilty of intentional homicide of the first degree as charged in the information. Dated this first day of February 2023, signed by the foreperson.
At the time of making this video, sentencing is scheduled for about 2 weeks from now. Jensen is getting life in prison, but the sentencing hearing will see whether he gets the possibility of parole or not. And it would be at this point of the video that I'd like to make a note that I've transitioned away from research and now speak from my own personal thoughts and opinions regarding this case. Straight off the bat here, I'm going to say that my opinion most definitely rests with the state's argument. There's not a doubt in my mind that Mark is guilty of this crime. But with that being said, that doesn't mean the state had a flawless case. And as I came to the conclusion that I agree with Mark's guilty verdict, I did notice a conflict arise within me. What I'm about to discuss may not have been too apparent throughout the video, because to be frank, there was too much I couldn't include. Arguments, evidence, and more. The thought I'm dancing around, even though it pains me to say it, is the fact that I do believe the defense presented a very compelling argument. Do I believe it? Not for a second. But there were times there where it had me questioning things. And to look at these things properly, I would first like to eliminate parts of the state's case which I believe to be weak. The first being Ed Klug's testimony, and the second being Aaron Dillard's. The defense managed to thoroughly destroy the ego-driven Ed's credibility in my eyes. And Aaron Dillard is too much of an intelligent predator for me to feel comfortable believing. I won't go into details picking apart what I don't believe about their testimonies right now. But if one is to follow my overarching thought process with it, you will see that without these two testimonies, the state still managed to sufficiently prove their case in my eyes. In fact, if we take out most of the witness testimony and leave nothing but raw data, it's the internet searches that are the real key pieces of evidence for me. These are too damning and remove reasonable doubt from my mind related to Mark's guilt. There's no way Julie could have been logging into Mark's intranet and searching poisons at the same time from the same computer. And I don't believe for a second that it was her emailing Kelly Labonte from the home computer whilst conducting some of these searches. It had to be Mark. And it also had to be Mark looking up poisons on the morning of her death, seeing as, by his own word, she was catatonic. To take it a step further, we saw how the pattern of internet use clearly shows the PC only accessed at times when Mark was at home, weekends and late at night, early morning, and so forth. And it was like this for months leading up to Julie's death. The defense argues that this makes perfect sense. Julie didn't want to leave her young child unattended during the day whilst she spent hours researching poisons. So she never surfed the net then. She did it only when Mark was home and he was able to look after the children. This freed her up to do her diabolical deeds. This theory is a complete reach, in my opinion. You're trying to tell me that Mark didn't cotton on to what she was doing, not once throughout all of this time. As Bob Jamboys said during his closing statement, if you hear hoofs in Wisconsin, it's probably a horse, not a zebra. I could go on and on about this how this evidence alone proves that Mark was the one behind the poisoning, and we don't ever need to hear from a single character witness to tell us about how she feared for her life. The searches speak for themselves. So one may ask, why then do you say the defense had a compelling argument? And it's a good question, because this is where it gets interesting. For me to have such clarity over the situation as I've just described, and then for that clarity to become muddied and murky when listening to the defense, it tells me one thing, that Mark is an incredibly good manipulator. As the defense cross-examines witnesses, as they pry into Julie's mental health, as the experts get up and use their position of knowledge to argue his side of the story, I can't help but to feel someone is trying to convince me that my reality, a reality which seems so crystal clear, is actually false. The defense's argument at its core is designed around Mark Jensen's words, and when my understanding of the situation confirms one thing, yet his words begin to make me doubt myself, as I begin to have thoughts such as, well, maybe Julie was crazy. Maybe she snapped. Maybe deep down she was this horrible, vindictive person who acted with only hate. Maybe she were that good a liar. She managed to pull the wool over everyone's eyes who said that she was a beautiful person. Those thoughts, that to me is scary, because there is really no evidence at all to suggest that this is the case. Yet there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that Mark is the very devil which he accuses her of being. It makes me think that on some strange level, I'm being gaslit. And some of you who may know me know that I don't like to throw buzzwords around easily. Words such as narcissist, sociopath, and gaslight. But that's what I do think is occurring here. For years, Mark convinced his wife that her perception on reality was inaccurate. And now here he is, trying to convince a jury the very same thing. After watching 2 of these trials play out, 10 weeks worth of testimony, I feel as though I've experienced but a fraction of what Julie went through. And if that is the case, what an awful and confronting thought. She was truly in a terrible situation. There's a few examples that popped up during testimony that, in my opinion, show a little window into what Julie was dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I'll play them now.
And where did you celebrate your son's birthday?
At my house.
And Julie was there?
Yes.
And who was with her?
Mark, David, and Douglas.
And what was your perception of Julie when she was at your house for your son's birthday?
She was as normal, but I know at the time she was a little irritated because Mark was wrestling around with David, where the activity was focused on my son's birthday and opening presents, and so they were being a little distracting.
It seems innocent enough, right? A father playing with his son at a party. But if one is to take a certain angle and look at it, it could also be a rather inconsiderate plot designed to make Julie and her family feel like they don't matter. He's taking a moment where everyone is focused on trying to facilitate a positive experience for a child. They're all displaying love and affection as the child opens presents, and they stop what they're doing to show this child that his experience matters. It's a ceremony whilst they watch this young child experience joy. And in this moment, here we have Mark, an intelligent man who should be sensitive to what's going on, seeing as this is the whole reason why they are visiting on this day. But instead of being sensitive, he does the opposite. He makes a distraction as he indicates that whatever is occurring around him is not as important as what he's doing. If this is what's happening and he is confronted about it, he can easily palm it off as, I got lost in the moment. I didn't know what was going on. Then he could even flip that around and accuse the accuser of paranoia and more. It's a very small moment indeed, but one that could be a telling window into a larger dysfunction. I'll play another example before moving on from this thought.
Can you tell us if you remember in 1997 to 1998 whether David Jensen had some health problems?
Yeah, he had a kind of recurring cough, which was kind of a nuisance, and it sort of defied diagnosis, and it seemed to be a tick.
Now tell me this, doctor. You also knew that Mark Jensen was a heavy smoker, correct?
I did.
And did Julie complain to you that he would smoke in the house and she couldn't get him to stop smoking in the house?
I don't remember talking about that.
Well, if in fact Mark Jensen is a heavy smoker and he smokes cigars and cigarettes and he smoked them in the house, might that account for the continuing cough that David was experiencing?
Could contribute.
That would certainly be an exacerbating factor, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Not only was David suffering from an incurable cough, but Julie would constantly be back and forth to the doctor for chest infections, coughs, and respiratory problems, all issues that would have been made significantly worse by being around an indoor smoker. Yet Mark would refuse to smoke outside. There's reports from neighbours that Mark blamed Julie for their son's facial tics. He would yell at her and tell her that it's her fault. And other people remember a time when he loudly scolded her for the wind knocking over some things and making a mess in their yard. And whilst I'm piling on Mark here, check out this eye roll he does whilst Perry Tarika testifies about the affair.
So you and Julie had made love that night?
Yes.
Okay. And that was on a Friday or Saturday night? Which was
it? It was Friday, and I was there the whole weekend.
The final thing I'll mention about him is his 400-page manuscript which he wrote in prison, a book telling his side of the story. I couldn't find too much information about what it contains, but what I did see made me feel pretty uncomfortable, to say the least. One of the parts I saw was a description about his visit to collect the Ambien from the doctor the day before Julie died.
Mark Jensen here describes in his book this visit to Dr. Borman, does he not?
He does.
And he wrote, "I walked in the door and approaching the receptionist counter explained, quote, Julie was here yesterday to see Dr. Borman. He gave her some samples last night. She woke me up acting drunk and blaming it on this," I said, showing her the printout. "I know I don't have an appointment, but this is on top of everything else that has been happening that led her to see Dr. Borman. I need some help and would really appreciate being able to see him." And then he writes, "Wearing an expensive suit and a Rolex gives a presentation of authority and genuine legitimacy. And when accompanying a reasonable and polite request frequently achieves the desired results. I know Borman to be a responsible, conscientious professional, and in this situation, refusal of a request for help would be irresponsible." That was his rendition of this visit to Dr. Borman.
Sounds to me the words of an image-focused egomaniac, hey? One who finds himself writing a manuscript about his wife's death, yet feels the need to brag about how he manipulates people, controls situations, and views others as pieces on a chessboard. The second piece of information I found regarding this manuscript relates to a gesture of kindness Julie had offered her brother.
And had you and your wife Jill suffered a loss earlier? Jill had just had a miscarriage?
Yes.
And did you talk with Julie about that?
Yes.
So Julie had learned about the miscarriage?
Yes. It was fresh news because it had just happened recently. And so we were very excited about having children. And so we had to break the news to my family that Jill had miscarried.
And did you and Julie have any conversation at your mother's funeral?
Yes.
And what did Julie say or offer at the funeral?
Julie offered to be a surrogate mother for us.
And other people were present when she made that offer?
Yes.
It was very touching.
It was extremely touching for my sister to offer that.
Included in this manuscript are some lines written by this defendant alleging that his wife wanted to be a surrogate mother for her brother, but wanted to get pregnant the natural way, without a petri dish.
It really seems like Mark takes every opportunity he can to throw mud on his wife's name, hey. And to make matters feel even more grimy, Mark would tell his wife at the time, Kelly, that he's writing this manuscript to try and sell his story, to turn it into a big-time famous book or movie and make tons of money. To add on to the awful image of this man, the Griffins report that their sister Julie wanted to be buried, but Mark went against her wishes, had her body cremated, and then scattered her ashes for them to never hold on to. When Paul last saw his sister Julie, he has a vivid memory of her sitting on the couch, and 3-year-old Doug sitting on her lap cuddling her. Paul says that Doug and Julie were inseparable, and that the boy never felt safe unless she was nearby. Yet 3 months later, this child lost that safety net. I can't even begin to comprehend how confused he would have been, how painful that is for a young child. And if Paul Griffin was aware of the connection Doug had with Julie, then surely Mark, a husband and father, would have been aware of this too. Yet he destroyed it. He's despicable, in my opinion. My thoughts then turn to the 8-year-old David Jensen, another victim in this. He was 17 at the time of his father's first sentencing hearing, and here the boy would write a letter showing his full support of his father. This letter would go into detail about how much he loves Mark, all of the good things he does, and how misunderstood the man is. These words make me feel uncomfortable, because one of two things are occurring here. Either the courts got it wrong, I've got it wrong, and the world has this terrible impression of an innocent man, or the alternative is, Mark has managed to convince this boy of a false truth. And that's not a far-fetched thought. If Mark is capable of convincing a grown, educated woman that she is crazy, I'm certain it would be barely an inconvenience for him to manipulate a 3- and 8-year-old into thinking that their mother is the real villain, and he a misunderstood anti-hero. This thought I'm having here, it seems I'm not the only one to think this way either, as Robert Jamboys says this very thing in response to the reading of David's letter.
I see both sides of Mark Jensen in this courtroom when I hear from his family, when I heard the letter that was written by David and Douglas, which I'm sure is a heartfelt rendition of their perception of their father. It doesn't surprise me in the least that Mark Jensen was able to hold his 2 small sons on his lap and weep with them over their terrible loss and cause them to believe that he was blameless for their terrible loss, knowing all along that he was the arbiter, he was the cause of this terrible loss. I can see Mark Jensen doing that.
This brings my thoughts to what I consider the highlight of these trials, and that being attorney Robert Jamboys himself. Without this man, I don't know if I'd been able to get through 10 weeks of these trials, hey. He's an absolute powerhouse of an attorney, of a human being. I can't say that I've ever enjoyed watching an attorney work more. He's brilliant, intelligence always on display, with just the right amount of emotion to boot. He's like a cannon that's secured to the wall, ready to fire at any moment. We all know this thing has the capability of destruction, and should its securings come loose, chaos will surely follow. I've put together a section of my favourite Jamboys moments, and let me tell you, it was difficult to cut it down to only these.
When you were seeing Julie Jensen, this was pretty much what's all about Julie, right? What's wrong with Julie, right?
She was the primary patient.
Yes, and you were diagnosing what's wrong with Julie, right?
Yes.
Would you agree that a fair number of the women you see, the problem with that the women are experiencing is not the woman, it's the jerk they're married to?
I would have to say, with all respect, when you add the word jerk in there, it has a connotation that I would say it would decrease the accuracy of the question being in an answer.
So you don't think that you've seen any women who are married to jerks?
I don't believe I said that. I have seen those.
Well, I'm asking you the question. When you've seen these women who've been married to jerks, was that a big part of the problem these women were experiencing?
It's very possible there's a high degree of problem.
Yeah. Now, in this case, Julie Jensen was married to a man who thought that she was paying too much attention to her 8-month-old baby. Isn't that true?
Yes.
She wasn't paying enough attention to him. She was paying too much attention to her 8-month-old baby, right?
There were changes in the situation due to the baby coming into the relationship. It's a complicated situation. What the stress factor is in terms of adding this, is it a financial stress? Is it a time stretch?
This is non-responsive. I want him to answer my questions and not just give us a great big long lecture about things I didn't even ask him about. I'd request you instruct the witness to answer my question.
Let's consider this also. Were you aware that Julie Jensen had told Therese DeFazio, I don't even know how to turn on a computer. Were you aware of that?
I know she had said some things to that effect, that she didn't use the computer, but I mean...
You seemed rather dismissive of her.
Well, you know,
is that
who knows why she said what she said, or if she said that. I mean, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. Do you honestly think that an adult in 1998 didn't know how to turn on a computer? That just seems... it seems unlikely to me.
You seem to have this bias against believing Julie when she's telling people things.
Well, I think there's reason to question why she says what she says.
Oh, so you didn't pay attention to what Mark Jensen had to say?
Well, yes, he said she was suicidal, but, you know.
And he's the accused murderer, right?
Right, so...
In your experience as a forensic pathologist and you're working with law enforcement, have you ever encountered somebody who's suspected of committing murder who lied to the police about it?
People lie to the police for all manner of reasons, yes.
Especially if they murdered somebody and they want to get away with it, right?
Sure.
Who would have a motive to get rid of any evidence that somebody had been on the computer looking up the stages of ethylene glycol poisoning? Who would have a motive?
Mark and Julie. They were the only people there.
Okay, so you're thinking Julie, the person that can't get out of bed, the person that had to be propped up in bed so that her children, you're thinking she's a suspect for looking this stuff up? If you accept that as the proposition that, hypothetically, that Mark Jensen was emotionally and psychologically gaslighting and torturing his wife for years and years and years before her death, would you consider that a relevant factor in determining whether or not Mark Jensen had the motive to murder his wife?
You know, as a forensic pathologist, when I think about my training and experience and review of the medical literature, I'm not aware of a correlation between pornography and killing your wife.
I'm not talking about somebody being interested in pornography. I'm talking about somebody emotionally, psychologically, sadistically torturing his wife for years and years and years, and then she ends up dead. As a forensic pathologist, you don't consider that history relevant to the determination, the distinction between murder and suicide?
People often go to elaborate lengths to make their suicide appear to be something other than a suicide. So...
I'm not following you. You're suggesting that Julie was going to elaborate lengths to make a planned suicide. She was planning a suicide, and she went to elaborate lengths to make it look like it wasn't a suicide.
I've seen that many, many times.
You have?
I have. Oh, absolutely. People that shoot themselves in the back and then fall in a river so that and then the gun washes away so that it looks like a homicide. I mean, there can be life insurance reasons to make it look like an accident.
So it seems like you're just kind of speculating about a lot of things. Do you have any specific information that would cause you to think that Julie Jensen was talking to Ted Voigt and Therese DeFazio to disguise the fact that she was going to commit suicide?
Well, I don't know.
Evidence of that, do you?
I don't know why she told them what she told them.
Okay, so a reasonable inference to draw about what she was thinking when she told him is that she was concerned that her husband was going to kill her, right?
That would certainly be one inference, sure.
Isn't that, of all the inferences one can draw, she's complaining that she thinks her husband might be trying to kill her. What motive could she have in telling that to Therese DeFazio or Ted Voigt unless she thought her husband was trying to kill her?
Well, if this is someone with mental illness, it's hard to know.
Well, let's talk about mental illness. I mean, you talk about mental illness. You're suggesting that she was depressed.
Yes.
Okay. There's no evidence of any other form of mental illness here, is there, besides what you're talking about, depression, from Dr. Borman's notes, correct?
Right. And he thought she was also anxious, anxiety and depression.
But he didn't think she was suicidal, did he?
No, she said she wasn't suicidal or homicidal and denied domestic violence and, right.
I lived with him for 18 years. You have no idea what he's capable of. If, hypothetically, that's what Laura Koster said to Julie Jensen, would that not indicate that perhaps her perception of reality was not distorted, that in fact she had reason to believe that her husband was trying to kill her?
I'm not sure how to interpret that statement in terms of not knowing what he's capable of. That seems relatively nonspecific.
You don't know what inference to draw from that?
No.
And you've got a medical degree and a medical degree, and you're a forensic psychiatrist, and you have no idea what inference you could possibly draw from that? Do you think that if Julie Jensen drew the inference that, gee, maybe my husband really is trying to kill me after what Laura Koster said to you, do you think that's an unreasonable inference for her to draw?
I don't know what inference she drew from that because it seems like a vague statement.
I lived with him for 18 years. You have no idea what he's capable of. That seems like a vague statement.
Yes.
If, in fact, Julie Jensen believed that Mark Jensen never forgave her for the affair that she'd had years and years earlier, and if, in fact, Mark Jensen manifested his hatred for his wife by doing all these hang-up phone calls, this emotional torture, leaving photos around the house, if, in fact, he did that, that would lend credence to Julie Jensen's perception of reality at the time that her husband was trying to kill her, wouldn't it?
I actually heard two hypothetical scenarios there.
Okay.
To which one are you referring?
Well, either one of them. Would either one of those cause you to believe that Julie Jensen actually had an accurate perception of reality when she suspected that her husband might be trying to kill her?
Yes, I would say that that would lend some credence to the idea that she had reason to be fearful of her husband.
So if, in fact, her perception of reality was not distorted, then that would undermine your diagnosis, wouldn't it?
No.
So even if her perception of reality was not in the least bit distorted, then your diagnosis remains the same.
Yes.
And even though she didn't complain of any sleep disorder, your diagnosis remains the same.
Yes.
So whose perception of reality is at issue here, yours or Julie Jensen's? Because it seems that you say these things were important, that they're part of your diagnosis, and then when they're refuted, that has no effect on your diagnosis at all. Isn't that true?
We're going to rephrase it. Go ahead, Mr. Jambois, rephrase it.
I'm trying to get your perception of reality here, doctor. The evidence that her perception was distorted was exactly what? What about Julie Jensen's perception was distorted?
That she believed, she reported to others, that her husband was trying to harm her, but her actions didn't match the belief that she shared. If she truly believed that he was trying to hurt her and she had all her faculties about her, I believe she would have sought help as a woman of means who had access to such ways of avoiding her husband and avoiding harm to herself.
So in your experience, women who are victims of domestic violence always leave as soon as they have the ability to do so?
No.
So in point of fact, many, many, many women who are in abusive domestic relationships remain with them because they want to make it work. So they take the risk of additional abuse, don't they, at the hands of their abusers?
Are we talking about Miss Jensen? Because I don't believe there's evidence to suggest she was in a relationship involving domestic violence.
Penis photos being left around the house. If this went on for years and years and years, and Julie didn't know who was doing this, that would be upsetting to the normal person, wouldn't it? That reflects a high level of a sadistic intent on the part of anybody who would do something like that to Julie Jensen.
Right. Yeah, that'd be in the category of domestic violence for sure, psychological.
So you don't think that a years-long campaign of terror and humiliation directed against her by her husband, you don't think that's a sign of an abusive relationship?
I don't have evidence that that occurred.
Now, from all of this, you can't surmise that Julie Jensen was the victim, the subject of a pattern of harassment and humiliation directed against her?
No, I don't see any reference to humiliation.
Okay. Now, I'm going to actually show you the email that Julie Jensen received on April 13th, 1998. And can you read what it says?
Here's a few for Jay of me soft. Also a shot I took without her knowing it of a married girl in the office I'm currently doing at a nearby hotel.
And that is from whom?
Turtle.
To whom?
Mark Jensen.
And the subject?
Me soft.
Okay, now I'm going to show you another email that appears to be from Turtle to Mark Jensen. So direct your attention to the screen. Can you see what that says?
This is the same email?
Yes, the same email, but now can you see who Turtle actually is?
From Turtle M. Jensen at execpc.com.
So M. Jensen at execpc.com. Do you have any professional opinion as to who that may be?
No, I don't have a professional opinion on who that
Do you have any opinion, any idea, any inference, any possible way, considering that we're here in the trial of State of Wisconsin versus Mark Jensen? Now maybe can you think who could M. Jensen at execpc.com, who could that possibly be?
I don't know.
You wouldn't surmise it might be Mark Jensen? You couldn't exclude the possibility that since Mark Jensen's email address is mjensen at execpc.com, might you surmise that that is Mark Jensen?
Again, I don't know.
You can't even accept the proposition that Julie Jensen viewed this email with all these penis photos on it. She viewed that as harassing behavior. You can't even accept that now?
I think it was an unusual circumstance. Again, I don't know how she responded to it emotionally.
We're going to take our morning break, folks. Good time to stop.
But the defense in this case is far more than just that Julie Jensen committed suicide. The defense is that Julie Jensen was a virulently angry, resentful, bitter woman who not only took her own life, but plotted to destroy her husband's life. In other words, not just that she committed suicide, but that in the process, she framed her husband for murder, thereby assuring that her two children would be left without a mother and without a father. Now, what evidence did you hear in this case that would support such an utterly ridiculous, utterly implausible presentation? Did you hear any evidence that would suggest that Julie Jensen was that kind of bitter, vindictive person? Well, if you heard that, I don't know where you heard it, because you didn't hear it in this courtroom. When you're deliberating on this case, think about Mark Jensen laying there next to his wife, or maybe he was just sitting there watching her as she was barely able to breathe, as she was gasping for life, for hour after hour after hour. Think of what was going through Mark Jensen's mind. Ask yourself, let alone how she got out of bed. Ask yourself, if she wanted to frame her husband, her last living act on this earth was to drag herself out of bed, go to his computer in his den, pull up more information on ethylene glycol poisoning, and then double delete the history, crawl back into bed, and die. Ask yourselves that. He can get rid of every shred of evidence that Julie Jensen had relied upon in thinking that maybe he was trying to kill her. And think how hard it is for somebody to believe that this man would actually do that.
He's a stockbroker. He's wealthy. He's smooth. He's a practiced and accomplished liar. Think how difficult it would be for the police to believe that Mark Jensen was trying to kill his wife. And think about a divorce court where they're deciding, what's in the best interest of the child. Where should these children go? Should the children go with this crazy woman who thinks that her husband's trying to kill her? She's delusional. She's delusional. How do you know a psychiatrist would say that? Well, you heard one get on the witness stand and say that she was delusional. You see, all the power that Mark Jensen has, the power to hire these expensive expert witnesses to come in and paint Julie Jensen as somebody that belongs in a loony bin, coming from a family that belongs in a loony bin. When you heard the Griffin family members, these are articulate, intelligent, soft-spoken, capable people, very decent people.
Do you honestly think, as you're sitting here right now, that any normally constituted human being, any normally constituted man, for 7 years after his girlfriend breaks up with him, for 7 years, he does hang-up call after hang-up call after hang-up call after hang-up call. For 7 years, he drops explicit pornographic photos off at the residence. That doesn't make any sense, does it? On the other hand, if you're dealing with a sadistic, narcissistic sociopath, which the evidence shows Mark Jensen is, then it makes perfect sense. He's sadistic. The evidence shows that he's sadistic. And what means did he have by which to perpetuate this sadistic plan that he had? Well, he had a seemingly endless array of penis photos on his computer and a seemingly endless array of fellatio pictures on his computer. He had an endless stock of pornography that he could use to humiliate and demean Julie Jensen with for years and years and years. And that's the mark of a sadist, a controlling, manipulative sadist. What a loving husband. Didn't she have reason to be happy on December 2nd, 1998 at 10 a.m.? She'd been lulled into believing that this monster that she was married to was finally showing her a little bit of love. That's what the evidence showed in this case, ladies and gentlemen. And you know he's guilty. Thank you. I responded to this scene almost exactly 24 years, 2 months ago. And I didn't know at that time that it was going to take a quarter of my life, or a third of my life, to put Mark Jensen away, but it was worth it. And I would do it again if the opportunity, if the necessity arose. I couldn't begin to tell you how much time my wife Beverly has spent on this case. And I'd seen some comment on the email, what's his wife doing there? Well, when I was in private practice, it was Jamboy's law office, and Bev was the managing partner of that office, and she and I worked together on every single case that I worked on. She's been an essential component of my legal career, and she was very, very, very involved in this Mark Jensen case. We've been listening to phone calls that Mark Jensen made to his family for years, and I want you to understand that is a painful process, because I can't think of a more banal, boring set of conversations than those that go on between a sadistic, narcissistic sociopath and his family, because he doesn't care about anybody in his family. He only cares about himself. And there's no emotional depth to Mark Jensen's conversations because he is a true sociopath. But who listened to those things? My wife and I did. Mainly my wife. But we'd go on vacation, we'd turn on those recordings and listen to them in the car while we're driving from here to Florida and driving from Florida back. We've got hundreds of hours under the belt of listening to Mark Jensen pratter on internally with his family. So I want to thank my wife for that as well. We were fully expecting a guilty verdict. I was very relieved, I guess, though.
And you hugged the former prosecutor from the first trial, Judge Gabrielle. Right?
Judge Angelina Gabrielle.
She was about the same age as I am now. 2 boys, almost the same age, 5 and 8. And, you know, I think that this was more about preserving Julie's memory for her boys. Because not only did Mark kill her, but he, as Bob said, killed the memory that these boys had of her. And she would have never done what they tried to say that she did. She would have never done anything to compromise the safety and security of her two children. And that's one thing that's become abundantly clear in talking to her brothers and her neighbors and everyone who knew her. The only people who say that there was some other ulterior motive is Mark Jensen. Even his sister can't say anything more than that. And so this was a little personal, because I can't imagine if something like that were to happen, where I were to die and then my husband would just ruin my memory in the minds of my two children. It's a terrible, terrible thing.
The way that the Jensen family attacked the Griffin family is just reprehensible. I mean, they said terrible things about Julie's mother and father. Julie's father was an accomplished individual. He was an engineer at American Motors for years and years and years. And contrast that with Mark Jensen's father. Dan Jensen's a convicted felon. He burglarized the building that he used to work in during the course of an SEC investigation, so he could steal the SEC records to stop the SEC investigation. He was caught red-handed. That didn't stop. He pled not guilty. He went to trial, and his daughter, Laura Koster, perjured herself on his behalf at that trial. She said she gave him an alibi, some ridiculous alibi, which the jury didn't buy because they convicted Dan Jensen of that case. So for this family, the Jensen family, to be tearing down the Griffin family is just reprehensible. The Griffins are wonderful people. Mr. and Mrs. Griffin, Julie's parents, were wonderful people. It's true that Mrs. Griffin had a problem with alcohol. Well, her son died at the age of 5. A lot of women would never recover from that. For the Jensen family to criticize the Griffins in this family was one of the great injustices in this case. Okay, well, thank you.
One more question. Do you still consider yourself, and this is not insulting, the smartest sewer in the rat?
The smartest rat in the sewer? Okay, so let's explain where that came from. I actually have a cup, smartest rat in the sewer. All these descriptions came from, I was also called Jambo. The defendant was always calling me Jambo. That came from his defense attorneys, Steve Glenn and Craig Albee. They told him apparently during some break that in Milwaukee County, the defense bar has a name for me. They call me Jambo because of my Rambo-like litigation tactics. Or maybe because that's how I look like in the swimming pool. I don't know. Startling resemblance to Sylvester Stallone. That could be it. I won't exclude that possibility. Then the other two descriptions came from from Dan Jensen. He had said, that Jamboys, he lays awake at night, staring at his ceiling with those beady red eyes, thinking of ways he's going to fuck you over. He's the smartest rat in the sewer. And when we heard that, my wife turned to me and said, he's got you cold. And so that was the smartest rat in the sewer thing. And yeah, I'm proud to have enemies like that. I'm proud to have the defense bar in Milwaukee thinks they call me Jambo, and I'm proud to have the murder suspects, the murder convict's father say that I'm the smartest rat in the sewer. I did lay awake at night thinking of ways that I was going to convict Mark Jensen, and now I don't have to think about that anymore. I can just go play with my grandchildren, which is what I very much prefer to do.
By the end of this video, I'd spent so much time with Jamboys that I really did feel as though he had become a friend. His passion for this case is infectious. And of course, I have to tell you a little bit of jam law. There's a story I read about him getting cranky with his teenage daughter's date who came to pick her up in his car. He didn't get out of the car and only honked his horn to signify his arrival. And when that happened, Jamboys came out and gave him a piece of his mind. That's a good dad, hey? Should Bob and Bev Jamboys ever watch this video, I hope they know they have a little fan club over in my corner of the world. I have much more that I could say, as this is by far the most enormous video I've ever worked on. My life has become Mark Jensen trial for so long now. I don't really remember what it was like before, hey? But seeing as I've kept you all here for quite a long time already, let's refocus and take a moment to reflect on the most important person who should be remembered out of all of this, Julie. I find it a tragedy that the Griffin family's name has been attacked so severely through this process. It hurts to learn that this family has been accused by Mark Jensen of being crazy and mentally unwell, when in reality they're probably nothing more than a group of lovely, eccentric creatives. People who sing tributes for their lost sister at inopportune times, and people who make songs dedicated to their grief. And sure, the family may be what some call weird, deep feelers, artsy types, but that's what being a human is, isn't it? We're all different, and one person's weird is always another person's normal. Julie Jensen, 40 years old. She was sensitive, empathetic, felt as though she put others' needs before her own. A good listener, quiet, shy and timid. The perfect target for an emotional abuser like Mark. I've thought about Julie a lot over the weeks that I've spent with this case. I've thought about what she went through, how stuck she must have felt, how maddening it must be to suspect one's partner is plotting to kill them, yet questioning their own sanity at each crossroad. I could imagine Mark believes that all of this is Julie's fault. If she didn't have that affair, then none of this would have happened. She brought it upon herself. But I argue that Julie was likely living with an emotional vacuum where her husband was supposed to be, long before that affair took place. So many horrible things. The reports that her desire to have a large family angered Mark. The talk that he wouldn't let her go and visit her dying mother in Florida because he didn't want to look after their child alone. That he refused to attend her father's funeral with her. That even before her affair, he would keep track of the miles on her car. It's just endless. What a piece of work, hey? Of course she had that affair with Perry. The man was being nice to her. She got a glimpse of what a relationship is meant to feel like. But I can't pretend to know her, and I'm going off of other people's words here, so I could be wrong. They could be lying about it all, right? One will never truly know. So with that, what I'll do is I'll leave you with some words written by people that did know her, words that helped me form my opinion, and words that I believe important to hear when looking into this case. Julie had a gentle, carefree, easygoing nature. She was somewhat quiet, although she enjoyed being with people. Her personality was warm, caring and sincere. Being from a close-knit, loving family, Julie valued enjoyment of family and friends, with a strong sense of humility, honesty, courtesy and thoughtfulness. She and her brothers also valued responsibility and hard work, and they would help their parents with daily chores around the house, such as cleaning, doing dishes, dusting, gardening, and always caring for their dog and other pets. Julie attended UW Oshkosh, where she was enrolled in the nursing program. She worked at a nursing home as well as working with Mark's house painting business to help with her school costs. Because Julie was a person who cared deeply for other people, she became very attached to patients in the nursing home. She was devastated when they would die, and therefore decided that she could not be a nurse. She quit the program shortly before her graduation. Julie's gentle personality allowed her to be a great mother. She had a natural, gracious, easy way in dealing with her sons as children. She nurtured them with patience and motherly love that all children deserve. She served as a good example in teaching them manners. Julie was living her loftiest goal as that of a devoted wife and mother. She was ever embellishing her cooking, continuing some of the traditional recipes passed on from her mother, and creating new ones of her own. The numerous ideas she was designing to beautify her home included indoor remodeling, painting and wallpapering, and outdoor landscaping and gardening. She would have already planned the next event to entertain friends and family at her home. Julie also sewed, which she learned from her mother. Her sewing room would have the patterns cut out for stylish homemade clothes and home furnishings such as curtains and quilts. She was also well known for choosing the perfect card for every occasion. Not only did she never miss any of her siblings' birthdays, she would send cards and gifts for every holiday, even including anniversaries. Just like her mother, she would personalize each card, usually filling it inside and on the back with her latest happenings, warm wishes and moral support. Throughout her well-rounded childhood and blossoming motherhood, Julie was optimistic by nature and gentle in all respects. Even strangers, upon first meeting her, would often comment on her welcoming and kind regards. Julie's equanimity was the hallmark of her life.
Killing Julie was not enough for Mark Jensen. He further chose to spit on her grave by claiming she killed herself. He tried to erase her existence from the lives of her sons. He has continued for almost 10 years to make her children believe that she left them stranded. He showed no mercy in his claims that Julie's mother and family, my family, are depressed, suicidal people. Mark Jensen is a coward. He claimed Julie's letter was not admissible in court because she was not here to be confronted, yet he made false claims against my deceased mother. Your Honor, Mark Jensen does not deserve any opportunities for a second chance. I ask today for the maximum, no mercy, no parole for Mark Jensen.
I will forever memorialize Julie in photographs, memories, and music. Someday, I hope to remember hearing how the defendant passed away, not as a free man, but as a person who finally paid the price for an ultimate selfish act that he had once committed long ago. I hope the court shows the same mercy and compassion that the defendant had shown to our sister Julie. So be it.
Judge, I believe Mark's motive for snuffing out the healthy life of the mother of his two boys was to feed a personal vengeance he had against her for a brief affair she encountered and for a playboy lifestyle that she prevented him from living. Divorce would have been so easy. Mark and Julie could have gone their own separate ways and negotiated the parenting of their children. But no, he saw fit to harm, to torture, to kill his wife, my sister. From whom did he acquire this authority over life and death? I believe he must suffer.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm Michael Griffin, Julie's younger brother. Mark Jensen didn't just poison Julie, my 40-year-old sister, a kind and caring person that everyone loved. For nearly 10 years, he emotionally tormented her and admitted in email to his illicit lover his enjoyment at causing her sexual pain. He murdered the sacred bond between his children and both their parents. Through the lies that characterize his defense, he further murdered memories of Julie and her entire family. We brothers lost our only sister, and to this day we have no treasures, heirlooms, or even simple keepsakes to bring us solace due to the actions of Mark Jensen. For nearly 10 years, we have suffered shock, horror, and angst at the lengths to which Mark Jensen went to destroy Julie, her family, and all she loved. We've had much time to relive our emotional toil over Julie's death, our supportive outreach to Mark Jensen in his false grief, and our continued grieving over the loss David and Douglas have suffered. We've managed to build our lives and our own families, all the while feeling sick, helpless, and empty over Julie's premature death. I will forever miss Julie's kind, gentle intelligence, our phone conversations that always demonstrated our kindred spirits, regardless of time and distance. I will forever miss her natural, joyful mothering of Douglas and David, and the loving way they looked at her. I will forever miss her greeting cards with every space filled with words of hope, optimism, and love of family life. I will forever cringe at how needless was this loss of life, and I will forever be in search of a light heart. In the name of justice, and not in the spirit of vengeance, I make request, Your Honor, that you exercise the harshest sentence possible, so that this dangerous individual, who is beyond psychological and social rehabilitation, can do no more harm to anyone, and we can make reparation through the truth for the memory of our sister, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin.